The education bestowed on Flora Poste by her parents had been expensive, athletic, and prolonged, and when in the winter of 1932 they died within a few weeks of each other, she was discovered at the age of 19 to possess every art and grace save that of earning her own living. After death duties had been paid, she was left with only an income of £100 a year and no property. She decided, therefore, to stay with a friend, a young widow called Mrs. Smiling, at her house in London, until she could decide where to bestow herself and her £100 a year. "Of course, darling," said Mrs. Smiling to her, "you can stay here as long as you like, but I suppose you'll want to take up some kind of work, won't you, and earn enough to have a flat of your own?" "What kind of work?" asked Flora. "Well, you might do journalism, or bookkeeping, or beekeeping." "I'm afraid I couldn't do any of those things, Mary." "Now, Flora, don't be feeble. What will you live on?" "My relatives." Mrs. Smiling looked shocked. "Yes, Mary, I'm only 19, but I've already observed that no limits are set either by society or one's own conscience to the amount one may impose upon one's relatives. Now, I'm peculiarly rich in relatives. There's a bachelor cousin of father's in Scotland, a sister of mother's in Worthing who breeds dogs, a female cousin in Kensington, and there are also some distant cousins, connections of mother's, who live in Sussex." "Sussex?" mused Mrs. Smiling. "I don't much like the sound of that. Do they live on a decaying farm?" "I'm afraid they do. Now, I propose to send a letter to all these relatives, asking them if they're willing to give me a home in exchange for my beautiful eyes and £100 a year." "Flora, how insane! You know that neither of us has ever been able to abide relatives." "Yes, but you see, when I have found a relative who's willing to have me, I shall take him or her in hand and alter his or her character and mode of living to suit my own taste. And perhaps one or two of them will have messes or miseries in their domestic circles which I can clear up." "You have the most revolting Florence Nightingale complex." "It's not that at all, and well you know it. But I have a tidy mind, and untidy minds irritate me. I cannot endure messes, because unless everything is tidy and pleasant and comfortable about one, people cannot even begin to enjoy life. I don't fuss, Mary. I'll write the letters tomorrow. Tonight I think we ought to dine out, don't you, to celebrate the inauguration of my career as a parasite?" "Well, your second cousin, Charles Fairford, is in town, the tall, serious, dark one." "He will do," said Flora with approval. "He has such a funny little nose." In the course of dinner, Flora told Charles of her plan. He was silent at first, and she thought he was shocked, but at last he said, looking amused, "Well, if you get very sick of it, wherever you are, phone me and I'll come in the car and rescue you." Flora promised that she would, for she liked Charles, whom she'd met only a few times before. He was to be a parson, and he was 23. Next morning she wrote her letters. While she was pondering over the best style in which to address the relatives in Sussex, she was struck by the singularity of their address. Mrs. Judith Starkadder, Cold Comfort Farm, Howling, Sussex. But she reminded herself that Sussex was not quite like other counties, and that when one observed that these people lived on a farm in Sussex, the address was no longer remarkable. When the second day brought no replies, Mrs. Smiling said, "I only pray that if any of them do answer, it won't be those people in Sussex. I think the names are awful, too ageing and putting off." "Yes, I think if I find that I have any third cousins living at Cold Comfort Farm, young ones, you know, who are named Seth or Reuben, I shall decide not to go." "Why?" "Oh, because highly sexed young men living on farms are always called Seth or Reuben, and it would be such a nuisance. Judith's husband is almost certain to be called Amos, and if he is, it will be a typical farm. You know what they're like." "Well, if you do go there, mind you wire me if either of your cousins is called Seth or Reuben, or if you want extra boots or anything. There's sure to be masses of mud." The next morning 4 letters came for Flora, including one in the cheapest kind of envelope, addressed in a barbed and illiterate hand. It was also dirty. The postmark was Howling. "There you are, you see," said Mrs. Smiling. "How revolting.
Do be quiet, Mary. Let's hear what the others have to say first. Aunt Gwen in Worthing said Peggy, who was so keen on her guiding, would love to share her bedroom with Flora. She wouldn't mind giving a hand with the dogs sometimes. Mr. McNagg in Perthshire feared it would be a little dull for her with only himself, who was often in bed with his old trouble, his man Hoots, and his housekeeper, who was deaf. But there was most interesting bird life on the marshes which surrounded the house on 3 sides. Her mother's cousin in Kensington could put her up in the large attic which was used as a meeting room for the Spiritist Investigators League. She hoped Flora wasn't a skeptic, as manifestations sometimes occurred there, and could the parrot keep his corner of it? At his age, the shock of removal might prove fatal. Flora and Mrs. Smiling looked at one another and shook their heads. The last letter was written upon cheap lined paper in a bold but illiterate hand. Dear niece, so you are after your rights at last. Well, I have expected to hear from Robert Poste's child these last 20 years. Child, my man once did your father a great wrong. If you will come to us, I will do my best to atone, but you must never ask me what for. We are not like other folk, maybe, but there have always been Starkadders at Cold Comfort Farm, and we will do our best to welcome Robert Poste's child. Child, if you come to this doomed house, what is to save you? Perhaps you may be able to help us when our hour comes. Your affectionate aunt, J. Starkadder. Flora and Mrs. Smiling were much excited by this epistle. Oh, I wonder what it was her man did to your father, said Mrs. Smiling. Did you ever hear him say anything about a Mr. Starkadder? Never. The Starkadders are only connected with us by marriage. This Judith is a daughter of Mother's elder sister, Adah Doom. So you see, Judith is really my cousin, not my aunt. Suppose she got muddled, and I'm not surprised. Well, Aunt Adah Doom was always rather a misery. Mother couldn't abide her, because she really loved the country and wore artistic hats. She ended by marrying a Sussex farmer. I wonder what has happened to Aunt Adah. She must be quite old now. Well, it sounds an appalling place. But I mean, it does sound interesting and appalling, while the others just sound appalling. I think you'd best go to Sussex, Flora. Yes, I think I will go to Sussex. I'm anxious to see what Cousin Judith means by rights. I shall go down next Tuesday afternoon. Now, go away, Mary, because I'm going to write to all these good people, and that will take time. I expect Seth will meet you in a jaunting car, said Mrs. Smiling on Tuesday as they sat at an early lunch. One does not have jaunting cars in England, Mary. If Seth meets me at all, it'll be in a wagon or a buggy. Well, I do hope he won't be called Seth. If he is, Flora, mind you wire me at once. And about gum boots, too. Is Charles coming to the station? Why? Oh, I don't know. He rather amuses me, and I quite like him. At London Bridge Station, there was Flora's train to take her via Godmere to Beershorn, the nearest station to Howling, and there was Charles carrying a bunch of daffodils. "Goodbye, darling," cried Mrs. Smiling as the train began to move. "Goodbye," said Charles. "Don't forget to phone me if it gets too much for you, and I'll come down and take you away." "I won't forget, Charles, dear. Thank you very much, though I'm quite sure I shall find it very amusing and not at all too much for me." And with an affectionate wave to them, she drew back into the carriage, and opening a fashion magazine, composed herself for the journey. Dawn crept over the downs like a sinister white animal, followed by the snarling cries of a wind eating its way between the black boughs of the thorns. The wind was the furious voice of this sluggish animal, Light, that was bearing the Dormers and Mullions and Scullions of Cold Comfort Farm. The farm was crouched on a bleak hillside, whence its fields, fanged with flints, dropped steeply to the village of Howling, a mile away. The spurt and regular ping of milk against metal came from the reeking interior of the cowshed. The bucket was pressed against Adam Lambsbreath's knees, and his head was pressed deep into the flank of Feckless, the big Jersey. His gnarled hands mechanically stroked the teat, while a low crooning came from his lips. He was asleep. He had been awake all night, wandering in thought over the indifferent bare shoulders of the downs, after his wild bird, his little flower, Elfine. The beasts stood with heads lowered dejectedly against the wooden hoot-pieces of their stalls, graceless, pointless, and aimless, awaited their turn to be milked. Suddenly a tortured bellow tore its way across the yard and died away in a croak that was almost a sob. It was Big Business, the bull, wakening to another day in the clammy darkness of his cell. The sound woke Adam, and he lifted his head from the flank of Feckless. His eyes, which looked small and wet and lifeless in his primitive face, lost their terror as he realized that he was in the cowshed and that his gnarled fingers were about the task which they had performed for the past 80 years and more. He stood up, sighing, and crossed over to Pointless, who was eating Graceless's tail. Adam, who was linked to all dumb brutes by a chain forged in soil and sweat, took it out of her mouth and put into it instead his neckerchief. She mumbled it while he milked her, but she stealthily spat it out as soon as he passed on to Aimless, and concealed it under the reeking straw with her hoof. She did not want to hurt the old man's feelings by declining his gift. Suddenly, a shadow fell athwart the wooden stanchions of the door.
"Adam," uttered the woman who stood there, "how many pails of milk will there be this morning?"
"I dunna many,"
responded Adam cringingly.
"'Tis hard to tell. If so be as ere Pointless has got over her indigestion, maybe till before. If so be she ain't, maybe 3.
Judith Starkadder made an impatient movement. Her large hands had a quality which made them seem to sketch vast horizons with their slightest gesture. She looked a woman without boundaries as she stood there, wrapped in a crimson shawl to protect her bitter, magnificent shoulders from the splintery cold of the early air.
"Well, get as many buckets as you can. Mrs. Starkadder questioned me yesterday about the milk. She has been comparing our output with other farms in the district, and she says we are 5/16 of a bucket below what our rate should be."
A strange film passed over Adam's eyes, giving him the lifeless primeval look of a lizard that has been basking in swooning southern heat.
"And another thing," she continued, "you will have to drive down into Beershorn tonight to meet a train. Robert Post's child is coming to stay with us for a while. I expect to hear this morning what time she's arriving."
Adam shrank back against the gangrened flank of Pointless.
Man I, Miss Judith, oh, dunna send me. How can I look into her little flower face and me knowing what I know? Ah, Miss Judith, I beg of 'ee not to send me.
"You must go, Adam. You must forget what you know. We all must, while she is here."
Could not Master Seth go instead of me?
Emotion shook the frozen grief of her face.
"You remember what happened when he went to meet the new kitchen maid? No, you must go."
Aye, then I'll go, Miss Judith. I done it many times I've thought how this day might come, and now I mun go to bring Robert Post's child back to cold comfort. Aye, 'tis strange. The seed to the flower to the fruit to the belly. Aye, so 'twill go.
Meanwhile, Judith had crossed the muck and rabble of the yard and entered the house. In the large kitchen a sullen fire burned, the smoke of which wavered up the blackened walls, and over the deal table, darkened by age and dirt, which was roughly set for a meal,
A snood full of coarse porridge hung over the fire, and standing with one arm resting upon the high mantel, looking moodily down into the heaving contents of the snood, was a tall young man whose riding boots were splashed with mud to the thigh, and whose coarse linen shirt was open to the waist. The firelight lit up his diaphragm muscles as they heaved slowly in rough rhythm with the porridge. He looked up as Judith entered and gave a short, defiant laugh. They stood in silence, she staring at him, and he down into the secret crevasses of the porridge. "Well, mother mine," he said at last. "Here I am, you see. I said I'd be in time for breakfast, and I have kept my word." His voice had a low, throaty, animal quality, a sneering warmth that wound a velvet ribbon of sexuality over the outward coarseness of the man. Judith's breath came in long shudders. She thrust her arms deeper into her shawl. The porridge gave an ominous, leering heave. It might almost have been endowed with life, so uncannily did its movements keep pace with the human passions that throbbed above it.
"Cur," said Judith at last. "Coward, liar, libertine. Who were you with last night? Moll at the mill, or Violet at the vicarage, or Ivy perhaps at the ironmongery? Seth, my son, do you want to break my heart?"
"Yes," said Seth with an elemental simplicity. The porridge boiled over. Judith knelt and hastily ladled it off the floor, back into the snood, biting back her tears. There was a confused blur of voices and boots in the yard. The men were coming in to breakfast, 11 of them altogether. Luke and Mark were half-brothers of Amos, Judith's husband, gross, silent men with an eye to the bed and the board. 5 were distant cousins of the Starkadders. The other 4 were the farmhands. Micah Starkadder, the mightiest of the cousins, was a ruined giant of a man, paralyzed in one knee and wrist. His nephew, Irk, was a little red, hard-bitten man with foxy ears. Irk's brother, Ezra, was horsey where Irk was foxy. Caraway, a silent man, wind-shaved and lean with long wandering fingers, had some of Seth's animal grace, and this had been passed on to his son, Harkaway, a young, silent, nervous man given to bursts of fury about very little when you came to sift matters. When all were seated, 2 shadows darkened the sharp, cold light pouring in through the door. They were no more than a growing imminence of humanity, but the porridge boiled over again. Amos Starkadder and his elder son Reuben came in. Amos put his pruning snoot and reaping hook down by the fender, while Reuben put the scrandlet with which he'd been ploughing down beside them. After Amos had muttered a long and fervent grace, the meal was eaten in silence. Judith's eyes burned under their penthouses, sometimes straying towards Seth as he sat sprawling in the lusty pride of casual manhood, with a good many buttons and tapes undone. Then those eyes would slide round until they rested upon the bitter white head and raddled red neck of Amos, her husband. Suddenly Amos looked up from his food. "Where's Elphine?"
"She is not up yet," said Judith. "I did not wake her. She hinders more than she helps a mornings."
"'Tis a godless habit to lie abed or working day, and the reeking red pits of the Lord's eternal wrathy fires lies in wait for them as do so. Aye."
Amos's blazing blue eyes swiveled round and rested upon Seth, who was stealthily looking at a packet of Parisian art pictures.
"Aye, and for those as break the 7th commandment too, and for those—"
The eye rested upon Reuben, who was hopefully studying his parents' apoplectic countenance.
"For those as waits for dead men's shoes."
When the meal was done, the hands trooped out to get on with the day's work of harvesting the Swedes. The male Starkadders, too, rose and went out to continue digging a well beside the dairy. It was taking a long time to do because things kept on going wrong. Once Harkaway had fallen into it. Once Irk had pushed Caraway down it. Still, it was nearly finished.
In the middle of the morning, a wire came from London announcing when the expected visitor would arrive. Long after Judith had read it, she stood motionless. Then slowly, with dragging steps, she mounted the staircase. Over her shoulder, she said to Adam, who'd come into the kitchen to do the washing up,
"Robert Post's child will be here by the 6 o'clock train at Beershorn. I'm going up to tell Mrs. Starkadders that she is coming today."
Adam did not reply, and Seth, sitting by the fire, was growing tired of looking at his art pictures, a 3-year-old gift from the vicar's son. Miriam, the hired girl, would not be in till after dinner. When she came, she would avoid his eyes and tremble and weep.
He laughed insolently, triumphantly. Undoing another button of his shirt, he lounged out across the yard to the shed where Big Business the bull was imprisoned in darkness. Laughing softly, Seth struck the door of the shed, and as though answering the deep call of male to male, the bull uttered a long, loud, tortured bellow that rose undefeated through the dead sky that brooded over the farm. Seth undid yet another button and lounged away. The timeless leaden day merged imperceptibly towards eve. At 5 o'clock, Adam was bid by Judith to put Viper, the vicious gelding, between the shafts of the buggy and drive to Beershorn.
"How shall I know the maidie?"
he pleaded of her as he lit the lantern hanging on the side of the buggy.
"Wait until everybody has left the station," she told him. "Robert Post's child will be the last, and she will wait to see if there is anyone to meet her. Be off with you."
And she struck the gelding upon his hocks. The great beast bounded forward into the gloom before Adam could check him. They were gone. Darkness fell, a clouded bell of dark glass eclipsing the soggy landscape. By the time the buggy approached Beershorn, which was 7 miles away, Adam had forgotten what he was going there for. From the stubborn, interwoven strata of his subconscious, thought seeped up into his dim conscious, not as an integral part of that consciousness, but more as an impalpable emanation, a crepuscular addition from the unsleeping life in the restless trees and fields surrounding him, the country for miles under the blanket of the dark, which brought no peace, was in its annual tortured ferment of spring growth. Worm jarred with worm, and seed with seed, frond leapt on root and hair on hair. Beetle and finch fly were not spared. The trout sperm in the muddy hollow under nettle flitch weir were agitated, and well they might be.
"Where are you, Elfine, my birdling?"
Adam's blind lips asked the unanswering dark.
"Did I coddle thee as a mommet for this?"
But the buggy reached Beershorn at last, and Adam pulled Viper up on his haunches as the great gelding was about to canter through the entrance to the booking hall, and he knotted the reins on the rennet post near the horse trough. Then animation fell from him. A sucked straw, his body sank into the immemorial posture of a man thought-whelmed. He was a tree trunk, a toad on a stone, a pie-thatched owl on a bough. If time passed, and presumably it did, for a train came in and the passengers got out, there was no time for Adam. He was at last roused by an obscure agitation which seemed to be taking place on the floor of the buggy. The straw, which had lain on the floor for the past 25 years, was being energetically kicked out into the road by a small foot shod in a stout but shapely shoe. The light of the lantern showed nothing above this save a slender ankle and a green skirt. A voice from the darkness above his head was saying, "How revolting!"
"Nay, nay, never do that, soul. That straw was good enough for Miss Judith's wedding trip, and it must serve. Straw or chaff, leaf or fruit, we man all come to it."
"Not while I can prevent myself," the voice assured him. "Now shall we be getting along, if you've finished brooding? My trunk is coming out by the carrier's van tomorrow, not that you'd be likely to care if it stayed down here until it's seeded."
"Robert Post's child?"
murmured Adam, staring up at the face he could now dimly see by the lantern light.
But I was sent here to meet ye, and I never saw ye.
I know.
Child, oh, child.
But Flora checked him by asking if he would prefer her to drive Viper, and this so affronted his male pride that he unhitched the reins and the buggy drove off.
Eventually, Viper stopped of his own will at a gate. Adam struck him with the whip.
He did not move. "I think we must be there," observed Flora.
Nay, never say that.
"But I do say it. Look, if you drive on, we shall go slam into a hedge."
"'Tis all one, Flora Poste, child."
"It may be all right for you and all one, but it isn't to me. I shall get down." So she did, and found her way slowly along a villainous, muddy path between hedges. Adam followed her, leaving Viper at the gate. The buildings of the farm could now be distinguished in the darkness. A door suddenly opened, and a beam of light shone out. Adam gave a joyful cry.
"'Tis our feckless opening the door for me."
The door was being anxiously pushed open by the nose of a gaunt cow. This was not promising, but immediately a deep voice was heard.
"Is that you, Adam?"
And a tall woman came out of the cowshed, carrying a lantern which she lifted to look at the travellers. Flora dimly discerned a red and voluminous shawl on her shoulders and a tumbling mass of black hair. "Oh, how do you do?" she called. "You must be my cousin Judith. I'm so glad to see you. It's terribly nice of you to have me." She put out her hand, but it wasn't taken at once. The lantern was lifted higher while Judith looked steadily into her face. But one could weary of this, and Flora soon did. She asked Judith if she would think her terribly rude if she didn't meet the rest of the family that evening. Might she just have a morsel of food in her own room?
"It is cold there,"
said Judith. "Oh, a fire will soon warm it up."
"My sons, Seth and Reuben, my sons are waiting to meet their cousin."
This seemed to Flora, in conjunction with the ominous names, too like a cattle show. So she said it was so nice of them, but she thought all the same she would see them in the morning. Judith's magnificent shoulders rose and fell in a slow, billowy shrug.
"As you will."
"Shall we go in now?" smiled Flora. "But first—" She opened her bag and took out paper and pencil. "I want Adam to send this wire for me." Half an hour later, she sat beside a smoky fire in her room, pensively eating 2 boiled eggs. She'd thought these were the safest to ask for. She wondered if she'd been wise to come. She reflected on the length of the air of neglect and the intricate convolutions of the corridors through which Judith had led her, and decided that if these were typical of the rest of the house, and if Judith and Adam were typical of the people who lived in it, her task would indeed be long and difficult. And at that moment, far away in London, Mrs. Smiling was reading with an "I told you so" look on her face, a telegram saying, "Worst fears realized, darling. Seth and Reuben too. Send gumboots."
At Cold Comfort Farm, Flora Poste awoke at 8:30. Not a sound came from the yard or from the depths of the old house. Everybody might have died in the night. She dressed in leisure, studying her bedroom, and decided that she liked it. It was square and unusually high, agreeably Victorian in its furnishings, and papered in a bold though faded design of red upon crimson. The curtains were magnificent. They were of soiled but regal red brocade. Flora looped them back and decided that today they must be washed. Then she went down to breakfast. She followed a broad corridor lit by dirty windows hung with soiled lace curtains and noticed, lying on the floor outside a closed door, a tray on which was the remainder of what had obviously been a large breakfast. A smell of burnt porridge floated up from the depths. In the kitchen, old Adam Lamb's breath was listlessly slicing turnips over the sink. "Is there any breakfast?" asked Flora. Adam shuffled forward. His eyes were like slits of primitive flint in their worn sockets.
There's porridge, Robert Post, child.
Is there any bread and butter and some tea? And have you a piece of clean newspaper I could put on the corner of this table to protect me from the porridge? It seems to have got tossed about a bit this morning, doesn't it?
There's tea in the jar, bread and butter in the crocket. You can find them yourself, Robert Post, child. I cannot run hither and run there to fetch newspapers for the capsy when it. Besides, we'm trouble enough at cold comfort without bringing in such a thing as a clamouring newspaper to upset and frighten us.
Oh, have you? What troubles? Asked Flora, busily making fresh tea.
There's a curse on cold comfort.
Indeed? Said Flora. What sort of curse? Is that why everything looks so gone to seed and what not?
There's no seeds, Robert Post, child. The seeds wither as they fall into the ground, and the earth will not nourish them. The cows are barren, and the sows are foreign, and the king's evil, and the queen's bane, and the prince's heritage ravages our crops. 'Cause why? 'Cause there's a curse on us, Robert Post, child.
But look here. Couldn't something be done about it? Or perhaps Cousin Amos could sell the farm and buy another one.
Nay, there have always been Starkadders at cold comfort. Mrs. Starkadder, she's sound of staying here. 'Tis the life in her veins.
Cousin Judith, you mean?
Nay, I mean the old lady, old Mrs. Starkadder.
He glanced upstairs. Is she dead, then?
Nay, she alive right enough. Her hand lies on us like iron, but she never leaves her room, and she never sees no one but Miss Judith. She never left the farm these 20 years.
He stopped suddenly, as though he'd said too much.
I mun clatter the dishes now. Leave me be in peace, Robert Post, child.
Seeing that he really was bent on doing some work, Flora let him be, and thoughtfully finished her breakfast. Adam, meanwhile, had finished slicing turnips and had gone out into the yard where a thorn tree grew, and returned with a long thorn-spiked twig. Flora watched him while he turned the cold water onto the crusted plates and began picking at the incrustations of porridge with his twig. "What on earth are you doing?"
"Clattering the dishes, Robert Post, child."
"But surely you could do it much more easily with a little mop, a nice little mop with a handle. Cousin Judith ought to get you one. Why don't you ask her? It would get the dishes cleaner, and it would be so much quicker, too."
"I don't want a little mop with handle. I've used a thorn twig these 50 years, and what was good enough then is good enough now. And I don't want to clatter the dishes more quickly, neither. Passes the time away, and it takes me thoughts off me little wild bird."
"Well, I shall buy one for you when I go into the village tomorrow." At this moment, a figure wrapped in a long green cloak rushed across the room and up the stairs. "Who was that?"
"My Codlin, my little Elfine,"
said Adam, listlessly picking up his thorn twig. "Indeed, and does she always charge about like that?"
"Aye, she's as wild and as shy as a Pharisee of the woods."
"Does she go to school?"
"Nay, you might as well send the yellow daffodilly to school as my Elfine. She learns from the skies and the wild marsh tigits, not out of books."
"How trying. Look here, where is everybody this morning? I want to see Miss Judith."
"Mr. Amos, she's down seeing the well drain for Sarah Luce's Polly. We think she'm fallen into it. Mr. Reuben, he's down Nettleflitch ploughing. Mr. Seth, he's off a mollocking somewheres in Owlin. Miss Judith, she'm upstairs, a-laying out to the cards."
"Well, I shall go up and find her. What does mollocking mean?" No, you needn't tell me." As she reached the head of the stairs, the tall girl in the green cloak came running lightly down the corridor and stopped as though shot. Doing the startled bird stunt, thought Flora, giving her a smile. "I'm looking for Cousin Judith's bedroom. Could you be a lamb and show me the way?" A pair of large blue eyes looked at her steadily below the green hand-woven hood. Elphine made a brusque, boyish movement.
This way.
She strode along the corridor, letting the hood fall back so that Flora could see the back of her unbrushed mane of golden hair.
Here,
she jerked out, stopping in front of a closed door. Flora thanked her so much, and Delphine, after another long stare, strode away. She will have to be taken in hand at once, thought Flora, as she tapped at Judith's door. 200 photographs of Seth, aged from 6 weeks to 24 years, decorated the walls of Judith's bedroom. She sat by the window in a soiled red dressing gown with a dirty pack of cards on the table in front of her. Her hair hung about her face, a nest of lifeless black snakes. "Good morning," said Flora. "So sorry to interrupt you if you're busy." Judith flung back her head with its load of snakes.
Busy. Busy weaving my own shroud, belike. Nay, Robert Post, child, give me time, and I will atone for the wrong my man did your father.
"I suppose you wouldn't care to tell me what the wrong was?"
Haven't I told you? My lips are sealed.
"Just as you like, Cousin Judith. By the way, I adore my bedroom, but do you think I could have the bedroom curtains washed? I believe they are red, and I should so like to make sure."
Curtains. Child, it is many years since such trifles broke across the web of my solitude.
"Yes, I'm sure it is. Could Adam do them?"
Adam, his frail arms have not the strength. Miriam, the hired girl, might have done them, but...
Her gaze strayed through the window to a little hut which stood at the far end of Nettle Flitch Field. From it came distinct cries of distress in a female voice.
"'Tis the hired girl in labour."
"What? Without a doctor or anything?"
"Animals like Miriam are best alone at such times. 'Tis not the first time."
"Too bad."
"'Tis the 4th time. Every year, the fullness of summer, when the sook bind hangs heavy from the wains, and when the spring comes, her hour is upon her again. 'Tis the hand of nature, and we women cannot escape it."
"Oh, can't we?" thought Flora. "Oh, well, of course she can't wash the curtains if she's just had a baby."
"She'll be about again tomorrow. Such wenches are like the beasts of the field."
Judith looked quickly across at a photograph of Seth on the table. It showed him in the centre of the Beers Horn Wanderers Football Club.
"Aye, look at him, the shame of our house. Cursed be the day I brought him forth."
"Well, Cousin Judith, if you really think Miriam will be about again soon, perhaps I might look in at her hut this morning."
"The 4th time. 4 of them. Love children. Pah! That animal. And love. And he..."
Here Flora realized that this was not a conversation in which she could join with any benefit, so she went quickly away. "So they all belong to Seth," she thought. "Really, it is too bad." She approached the hut in some trepidation, for she had a lively acquaintance with confinements through the works of women novelists, especially the unmarried ones. She had also learnt the degraded art of tasting unread books, and now, whenever her skimming eye lit on a phrase about heavy shapes or sweat or howls or bedposts, she put the book back on the shelf. So she was relieved when a voice replied,
"Who's there?"
to her tap on the door. "Miss Poste, from the farm. May I come in?"
"What do we want with me and mine?"
Flora sighed. It was curious that persons who lived what the novelists called a rich emotional life always seemed a bit slow on the uptake. She pushed the door open and walked in. A young woman was sitting over an oil stove and reading Madame Olga's dream book. Baby, there was none. The hired girl, who was, of course, rather sullen-looking and like a ripe fruit, stared at her. "Good morning," said Flora. "Are you feeling better? Mrs. Starkadder thinks she will be about again in a day or two, and I would like you to wash the curtains in my bedroom."
"Why do we come here and mocking me in my shame, and me only out of me trouble yesterday?"
Yesterday? But surely weren't you crying out only about 10 minutes ago? The beginnings of a sullen smile touched the hired girl's sensual lips.
I moithered out a bit. I was remembering me trouble yesterday. Mrs. Starkadders, she weren't in the kitchen when my time come on me. How should she know what I been through and when I been through it? Though 'tain't as bad as some folk make out. Mum says it's because I keep me spirits up and eats hearty beforehand.
Indeed. I'm glad to hear it. Flora wondered if the women novelists had been misinformed about confinements. No, she remembered. They left themselves a loophole by occasionally creating a primitive woman, a creature who was as close to the earth as a bloomy green gauge, and rather like one to look at and talk to. And this green gauge creature never had any bother with her confinements, but just took them in her stride. Evidently, Miriam belonged in the green gauge category. When can you take the curtains down?
I never said as I wash your curtains. I've not enough to bear with 3 children to find food for, and me mum looking after the 4th. I used to know what'll happen to me when the sook bind is out in the edges again, and I feel so strange on the long summer evenings.
Nothing will happen to you, if only you use your intelligence and see that it doesn't. Never mind about the sook bind for a minute. What is this sook bind, anyway? Listen to me. And carefully, in detail, in cool phrases, Flora explained to Miriam how to forestall the disastrous effect of too much sookbind and too many long summer evenings upon the female system. Miriam listened, with eyes widening.
"'Tis wickedness! Oh, 'tis flying in the face of nature!"
Nonsense. Now remember, Miriam, no more sookbind and summer evenings without some preparations beforehand. At that the door opened, and on the threshold, taking in Flora from heels to beret, with snapping little black eyes, stood a rusty black shawl with a hat alighting perilously upon the knob of hair which crowned the top of its head.
"'Tis Mum,"
said Miriam.
"Good morning, miss. A nasty day," snapped the shawl. "She wants me to wash her bedroom curtains." "Who's she? The cat's mother?" "You must excuse her, miss. She's more like father's side of the family. It was a black day for me when I took up with Agony Beetle and left Sydenham for Sussex. She'll wash 'em for you, miss, and I'll come and put 'em up for you." After Flora had thanked them and gone, Miriam began to tell her mother in thick, lewd whispers what Flora had advised. "Well," said Mrs. Beetle, "it's no news to me, though I wasn't quite sure how it was done, nor how much they cost. Not that I hold with what she told you, mind." "Aye, 'tis wickedness, 'tis flying in the face of nature."
"That's right. All the same, it might be worth trying." By lunchtime next day, the unceasing rain, the distressing manner in which the farmhouse seemed to be sinking into decay, and the character and appearance of those relatives she had met so far, produced in Flora a feeling of gloom. "This won't do," she thought. "I'm probably hungry." So she decided to go down into Howling to find a pub where she could lunch, and at the Condemned Man, Mrs. Merthyr, the landlady, provided her with something to eat.
"Now I must be off to see to my other gentleman's dinner," said Mrs. Merthyr. "He's staying here, a book writer."
"He would be," muttered Flora. "What's his name?"
"Mr. Mybug."
What a bore it was, thought Flora. Hadn't she enough to do a cold comfort without there being a book writer named Mybug staying a mile away who would probably fall in love with her? For she knew that intellectuals often concentrated upon normal and properly dressed persons like herself, who were both repelled and alarmed, not to say bored, by their purposeful advances. "What kind of books does he write?" she asked.
"Well, he's doing one now about another young fellow who wrote books, and then his sisters pretended they wrote 'em, and then they all died of consumption, poor young mommets."
"A life of Bramwell Bronte," thought Flora. "I might have known it. Well, I must just try to avoid him, that's all." She felt better on her return walk to the farm, and at 4 o'clock she came down to the kitchen to make herself tea. She brought down some sewing with her, and later, as she sat embroidering a petticoat, Adam came in carrying a bunch of thorn twigs. He glanced spitefully at Flora, and as he placed the twigs on a shelf above the sink, he muttered to himself,
Aye, they don't last me till Michaelmas to clatter the dishes with. There's nothing like a thorn twig for clattering dishes. Aye, ropes as good as altar to a willing horse, curses like rookses, flies home to rest in bosomses and barnses.
As he shuffled out, Flora thought she really must remember to buy him a little mop. She heard a step in the yard, and there entered a young man who could only be Seth. Flora looked up with a cool smile. "How do you do? Are you Seth? I'm your cousin, Flora Poste." He came over to her with the lounging grace of a panther and leaned against the mantelpiece. She was for it.
What's that you're making?
Flora knew that he hoped the petticoat was a pair of knickers. She replied that it was an afternoon tea-cloth.
Aye, women's nonsense. Women are all alike. Aye, fussing over their fal-lals and bedazzling a man's eyes when all they really want is a man's blood and his heart out of his body and his soul and his pride.
"Really?" said Flora, looking in her workbox for the scissors.
Aye, that's all women want. And when they got him bound up in their fal-lals and bedazzling ways and their softness, and he can't move because of the longing for him as cries in his man's blood, do you know what they do then?
"I'm afraid not. Would you mind passing me that reel of cotton on the mantelpiece just by your ear? Thank you so much."
They eat him, same as any spider eats a cock spider.
"Indeed?"
Aye. I don't let no woman eat me. I eats them instead.
Flora thought an appreciative silence was the best policy to pursue at this point.
That shocks you, eh?
"Yes, I think it's dreadful."
"Dreadful? Aye, you're all alike, mealy-mouthed as a school kid. I lay you don't understand half of what I've been saying, do you, little innocent?"
"I'm afraid I wasn't listening to all of it, but I'm sure it was very interesting. You must tell me about your work sometime. What do you do now on the evenings when you aren't eating people?"
"I goes over to Beershorn. I goes to the talkies."
"The talkies, do you? Do you like them?"
"Better nor anything in the whole world. Better nor my mother, nor this farm, nor Violet down at the vicarage, nor anything."
"Indeed? That's very interesting."
"I got 74 photos of Jean Harlow, and 40 of Jeanette MacDonald, and 15 of Dolores Del Rio, and signed ones."
Flora nodded courteously, showing nothing of the plan which had suddenly occurred to her. Seth, after a suspicious glance, muttered that he was going into Beershorn to see
Song of Songs,
and took himself off. She found some difficulty during the next week in meeting her cousin Amos, while no one breathed a word about introducing her to Aunt Ada Doom. Each morning she watched Mrs. Beetle, who came in daily to prepare Aunt Ada's meals, stagger upstairs with a heavily loaded breakfast tray. "I haven't met my aunt yet," Flora told her. Mrs. Beetle replied somberly that Flora hadn't missed much. On the other hand, Mrs. Beetle had been heard to remark that at least there was one of 'em at Cold Comfort as knew her own mind, even if she had seen something nasty in the woodshed when she was 2. Flora had no idea what this could possibly mean. A local idiom, perhaps, for going cuckoo. She learned from Adam that Amos preached twice a week at the Church of the Quivering Brethren. So when Tuesday evening came, she approached her cousin after tea. "Cousin Amos, are you going down into Beershorn to preach to the brethren tonight?"
"Aye."
He was encased in black fustian, which made his legs and arms look like drain pipes.
"They'll all burn in hell, but I mun surely tell 'em so."
"Well, may I come too?"
"Aye, ye can come, ye poor miserable creeping sinner. Maybe you think you'll escape hellfire if you come along with me and bow down and quiver, but I'm telling ye, no, 'tis too late. You'll burn with the rest."
On the drive to Beershorn in the buggy, Flora asked him, "Does anyone else preach, or are you the only one?"
"Only me. No one else gets the word like I do."
"I'm looking forward to hearing you. I suppose you like preaching very much."
"Nay, 'tis a fear for torment and a groan into me soul's marrow.
You ought to preach to a larger congregation than the brethren, she said, struck by a very good idea. You mustn't waste yourself on a few miserable sinners in Beershorn. Why don't you go round the country with a Ford van, preaching on market days? You have a call, you know. Wouldn't you like to preach to thousands?
Aye, dearly, but 'tis vainglorious to think on't,
he replied wistfully. What does that matter? What does your soul matter, Cousin Amos, compared with the souls of thousands who might be saved by your preaching?
Aye, there's truth in what you say. Maybe it is me duty to seek a wider field. I mun think on't.
He stopped outside a building which Flora took at first to be an unusually large dog kennel. Inside, through the open door, could be seen seats and walls of pitch pine.
We mun wait till the chapel is full, whispered Amos. 'Tis frightening for 'em to see their preacher among 'em like any simple soul.
And he drew Flora back with him into a doorway. Flora, observing the faces of the brethren as they crowded into the dog kennel, thought she'd seldom seen so healthy and stolid an audience. It compared most favourably with the audience at a meeting of the Cinema Society, to which she'd recently unwillingly accompanied a highbrow friend. That audience had run to beards and magenta shirts, and it had sat through a film of Japanese life called Yes, made by a Norwegian director in 1915. All round her, Flora remembered, people were muttering how lovely were its rhythmic patterns. But one little man sitting next to her just ate sweets out of a paper bag, and at the seventh close-up of a large Japanese face dripping with tears, the little man held out his bag.
Our peppermint cream? It must have something.
When the lights at last went up, he introduced himself as Earl P. Knack of Hollywood, and invited her and her friend to tea. He was a film producer, he told them, and in the summer he'd be returning to Hollywood with the annual batch of England's best actors and actresses. Flora thought she would invite Mr. Knack to spend a day with her in Sussex. There was somebody about whom she wished to talk to him. Now she saw that the chapel was nearly full. Somebody was playing a shocking tune on the poor little wheezy organ. Do Judith or the boys ever come down to hear you preach, Cousin Amos?
Nay, they struts like Ahab in their pride, and the hand of the Lord it lies heavy on cold comfort, pressing the bitter wine out of their souls.
Then why don't you sell it and buy another farm on a really nice piece of land?
Nay, 'tis old Mrs. Starkadder, Adah Doom as was before she married Fig Starkadder. She'd never see us go, and Reuben sits a-waiting for me to go so as he can have the farm. But an she'll never have un. Nay, I'll leave it to Adam first.
Before Flora could convey to him her sense of dismay at this threat, he moved forward.
'Tis nearly full. We mun go in.
The first hymn went, Whatever shall we do, O Lord, when Gabriel blows o'er sea and river, fen and desert, mountain ford, the earth may burn, but we will quiver. The singing was conducted by a surely excessively dirty old man with long grey hair, who waved what Flora incredulously decided was a kitchen poker. Who is that? She asked the female beside her.
'Tis Brother Ampleforth. He leads the quivering when we begins to quiver.
And why does he conduct the music with a poker?
To put us in mind of hellfire.
After the hymn, everyone arranged themselves comfortably, while Amos rose with terrifying deliberation and mounted the platform. For some 3 minutes he slowly surveyed the brethren with an expression of the most profound loathing and contempt, mingled with a divine sorrow and pity. Flora had never seen anything to touch it, except the face of Sir Henry Wood contemplating some latecomers at the Queen's Hall, just as his baton was raised. Her heart warmed to Amos. The man was an artist. At last he spoke.
Ye miserable crawling worms, are ye here again then? Have ye come like Nimshi, son of Rehoboam,
Secretly out of your doomed houses to hear me telling of the great crimson-licking flames of hellfire?
A long, effective pause and a further imitation of Sir Henry.
I've come, hundreds of ye, like rats to a granary, like field mice when there's harvest home. And what good will it do ye? Nowt, not the flicker of a whisper of a bit of good. You're all damned.
An expression of lively interest and satisfaction passed over the faces of the brethren.
Damned. And do you ever stop to think what that word means when you use it every day so lightly in your wicked lives? Nay? Well, I'll tell ye. It means endless, horrifying torment, with your poor sinful bodies stretched out on hot gridirons in the nethermost fiery pit of hell, and the demons mocking ye, while they waves cooling jellies in front of ye, and binds ye down tighter on ye dreadful bed. Aye, and the air be full of the stench of burnt flesh, and the screams of your nearest and dearest.
He took a gulp of water. Flora was beginning to feel she could do with a glass of water herself. Amos's protruding eyes ranged over his audience.
Ye know, don't ye, what it feels like when ye burns your hand with your match when you're lighting one of they godless cigarettes, and ye run away to clap a bit of butter on it to take the pain away? Ah, but there'll be no butter in hell. Your whole body'll be burning and stinging with the unbearable pain, and your blackened tongues'll be sticking out of your mouths, and your cracked lips will try to scream for a drop of water, but no sound won't come, 'cause your throat is drier nor the sandy desert, and your eyes'll be beating like great red hot balls against your shriveled eyelids.
At this point, Flora quietly rose and, with an apology to her neighbour, passed rapidly to the door. She opened it and went out. She felt she could pass the evening more profitably, but where? She couldn't return to the farm, except with Amos in the buggy. It was now 8 o'clock, and she was hungry. Most of the shops were shut, except for one. It was called Pam's Parlour, and looked pretty grim. But there were cakes in the window, and where there were cakes there might be coffee. She went in. No sooner was she inside than she realized she had gone out of hellfire into an evening of boredom. For someone was seated at the table whom she recognized. She seemed to remember meeting him at a party in Bloomsbury, and he could only be Mr. Mybug. There was no one else in Pam's Parlour. He had a clear field, and she could not escape. After Flora had escaped from Amos's hellfire sermon in the chapel of the Quivering Brethren, she sought refuge in a tea shop. There, to her dismay, she found the only other customer was a person she supposed must be Mr. Mybug, the intellectual gentleman who was staying at the pub in Howling. He glanced up at her as she came in and looked pleased. He had some books and papers on his table and had been busily writing. By now, Flora was really cross. Surely she'd endured enough for one evening without having to listen to intelligent conversation. She sat down at a table with her back to him, picked up the menu, and hoped for the best. The waitress brought her coffee and biscuits, and she was just eating her fourth biscuit when she became conscious of a presence approaching her from behind.
"Hello, Flora Poste. Do you believe that women have souls?"
And there he was, standing above her and looking down at her with a bold yet whimsical smile. "I'm afraid I'm not very interested," said Flora.
"Aren't you? Good girl. We shall be all right if you'll only be frank with me. As a matter of fact, I'm not very interested in whether they have souls either. Bodies matter more than souls, I say. You remember me, don't you? We met at the Pulsewets in October. Do you know Billy Pulsewet well? She was a charming person, I think, so simple and gay, and such a genius for friendship. He's charming, too. Bit homo, of course, but quite charming. May I sit here?"
"Do," said Flora, seeing that her hour was upon her and that there was no escape. Mr. Mybug sat down and beckoned to the waitress, who told him that we were closed.
"I say, that sounds vaguely indelicate,"
laughed Mr. Mybug, glancing at Flora.
"Well, look here, miss, never mind that. Just bring me another coffee, will you?" Mr. Maybach sat down and leaned his elbows on the table, sank his chin in his hands, and looked steadily at her. Flora merely went on eating her biscuit, so he was forced to open the game with, "Well?" a gambit which she recognized with a sinking heart as one used by intellectuals who decided to fall in love with you. "You're writing a book, aren't you?" she said hastily. "Isn't it a Life of Bramwell Bronte?"
Yes, it's going to be damn good. It's a psychological study, of course. It's obvious that Wuthering Heights is his book and not Emily's. No woman could have written that. It's male stuff. I've worked out a theory about his drunkenness, too.
Flora swallowed a tiny yawn. What are you going to call it?
I'm hesitating between Scapegoat, a study of Bramwell Bronte, and Pod Spirit, a study of Bramwell Bronte. You know, pod-like spirit, beautiful and swift. Which do you like best?
Pod Spirit, said Flora, not because she did, but because it would lead to a long and boring argument if she hesitated. Mr. Maybach had been looking at her very steadily with his chin lowered.
"Little cat about walking," he said. "I thought we might do some walks together, I feel, Carter. I better warn you, I'm pretty susceptible."
And he gave a curt laugh, still looking somberly at her. But Flora had seen the quivering brethren and Amos coming out of the chapel across the street and knew that rescue had come. "I must go, I'm afraid. There's my cousin looking for me. Thank you for telling me about your book. It sounds so interesting. Goodbye. Perhaps we'll meet again sometime." Mr. Maybach leapt on this remark, which had slipped out before she could help herself, and said eagerly that it would be
"Great fun if they could meet again. I warn you," he said, "I'm a queer, moody brute. Nobody likes me. I'm like a child that's been whacked over the knuckles till it's afraid to shake hands. But there's something there if you care to dig for it."
Flora did not care to dig, but she thanked him with a smile and hurried across the street to join Amos. As she came up to him, he drew back and pointed at her. "Fornicator!" "No, dash it, Cousin Amos, that was a person I'd met before at a party in London."
"'Tis all one. Aye, and worse too, coming from London, the devil's city."
However, he said nothing more about it as they drove home, save for a remark that Flora had missed a good deal by not staying for the quivering. It was now the 3rd week in March. Fecund dreams stirred in the yearlings. The sook-bind was in bud. Seth, of course, was always busiest in the spring. As for Flora, she was quite enjoying herself. She was mixed up in a good many plots, but her plot to make Adam use a little mop to clean the dishes with instead of a thorn twig had gone sour on her. One morning when Adam came into the kitchen after breakfast, Flora said to him, "Oh, Adam, here's your little mop. Look, isn't it a nice little one? You try it and see." For a second she thought he would dash it from her hand, but gradually, as he stared at the little mop, his expression of fury changed. It was indeed rather a nice little mop. Most taking of all, it had a loop of fine red string with which to hang it up. Adam cautiously put out his finger and poked it.
"'Tis mine?"
I mean, yes, it's yours, your very own. Do take it." His gnarled fingers folded round the handle.
"Aye, 'tis mine, nor else nor kine, and yet 'tis mine, my little mop."
He undid the thorn twig which fastened the bosom of his shirt and thrust the mop within.
"My little mop."
"Yes, it's to clatter the dishes with."
"Nay, nay, 'tis too pretty to clatter them great old dishes wi'. I mun do that with the thorn twigs. I'll keep my little mop in the shed along wi' our pointless and our feckless."
"They might eat it."
Aye, so they might, Robert Post child. Well, I mun hang it up by its little red string above the dishwashing bowl. Never put my little pretty in that greasy washing up water. Aye, 'tis prettier nor apple blues, my little mop."
And shuffling across the kitchen, he carefully hung it on the wall above the sink and stood for some time admiring it. Flora went crossly out for a walk. Occasionally, while walking on the downs, she'd seen her young cousin Elphine, but the girl never came near her. Adam had confided his fears about Elphine.
She's a-spearing at the windows of Hale Chicker Hall to get a sight of that young chuck stubborn, Master Richard.
Is that the young squire, Richard Hawke Monitor?
Aye, blasting for a capsy set-up yearling of a womanizer.
Behind Adam's rage were traces of a racy, yeasty, post-toasty interest in the sordid drama of man's eternal blind attack and woman's inevitable yielding and loss. Flora asked when the young people were to be wed.
When apples grow on the sook-bind, ye may see lust bias in the wedding garment,
he said. Flora knew her hunting gentry. They hated fuss. Poetry, Flora was pretty sure Elphine wrote poetry, bored them. They liked dogs to be well-trained and girls to be well-turned out. Elphine, she decided, must be civilized, and then she must marry Richard. Meanwhile, Aunt Adah Doom sat in her room upstairs alone. The old woman's thoughts cowered in the hot room. She would not see her niece. Keep her away. When you were very small, you had seen something nasty in the woodshed. You'd never forgotten it. That was what made you different. That, what you had seen in the tool shed, had made your marriage a prolonged nightmare to you. Somehow you had never bothered about what it had been like for your husband. Even now, when you were 79, you could never see a bicycle go past your bedroom window without a sick plunge at the apex of your stomach. In the bicycle shed, you'd seen it, something nasty, when you were very small. That was why you stayed here in this room. You'd been here for 20 years, ever since Judith had married and her husband had come to live at the farm. You told them you were mad. The woodshed incident had twisted something in your child brain 70 years ago, and seeing that it was because of that incident that you sat here, ruling the roost and having 5 large meals a day brought up to you as regular as clockwork, it hadn't been such a bad break for you that day you saw something nasty in the woodshed. Big Business, the bull, was bellowing. The steady sound went up into the air in a dark red column. Seth leaned moodily on the hoot-piece, watching Reuben repair a leak in the midden rail. Both brothers looked up as Flora came across the yard dressed for her walk. She looked inquiringly at the bull's shed. "I think it would be a good idea if you let him out." Seth grinned and nudged Reuben, who went red. "I don't mean for stud purposes. I meant simply for air and exercise. You cannot expect a bull to produce healthy stock if he's shut up in the smelly dark all day." Seth lounged away, but Reuben, as Flora had discovered, was always ready to listen to advice which had the good of the farm at heart.
"Aye, 'tis true," he said. "We mun let un out in the big field tomorrow."
"By the way, Reuben, I was advising Cousin Amos to address his sermons to a wider audience. I think he ought to go round the country on a lorry, preaching."
"'Tis impossible. The old lady'd never let him go. 'Twould bring on an attack."
"An attack? What of?"
She's mad."
Oh, so that was it. Aunt Adah Doom was mad.
"Aye, 'tis terrible, and her madness takes the form of wanting to know everything as goes on. She has to see all the accounts books twice a week, and if we keeps 'em back, she has an attack. She never comes down but twice a year, on the 1st of May and on the last day of Harvest Festival. If anybody eats too much, she has an attack. Oh, it is terrible."
It is indeed. Is that why she doesn't want to see me?
Maybe.
Well, anyway, because Aunt Adah is mad, there's no reason why you shouldn't persuade Cousin Amos to go on a preaching tour and manage the farm while he's away.
"Do you think if I was to look after the farm while the old devil was away moithering about hellfire, he'd come back and see as I could do it and maybe leave it to me for me own when he's gone?"
Yes, I do.
"Aye, dang me if I don't din into the old devil how he must be off speechifying this very week."
And to her surprise, he held out his hand to her. This was the first sign of humanity she'd encountered among the Starkadders, and she was moved by it. It was a fresh, pleasant morning, and she felt the more disposed to enjoy her walk because for the first time in 4 mornings Mr. Maybag wasn't with her. It can't be said that she really enjoyed taking walks with him. To begin with, he wasn't really interested in anything but sex. They used to walk sometimes through a pleasant wood of young birch trees just coming into bud. The stems reminded Mr. Maybag of
phallic symbols.
He pointed out to Flora that he and she were walking on
seeds which are germinating in the womb of the earth.
He said it made him feel as if he were
trampling on the body of a great brown woman.
Flora sometimes asked him the name of a tree, but he never knew.
God, that little pool down there in the hollow was shaped just like somebody's navel. He would like to drag off his clothes and leap into it. In no other country but England was there so much pruriency about nakedness. If we all went about naked, sexual desire would automatically disappear. Once a whole lot of us bathed in the river with nothing on, and afterwards little Harriet Belmont sat naked in the grass and played to us on her flute. It was delicious, so warm and natural and real somehow.
So taking it all round, Flora was pleased to have her walk alone. And then she came upon Elphine, sitting on the turf and sunning herself. Elphine jumped to her feet and stood poised. "You're Flora. I'm Elphine." No prizes offered, thought Flora rather rudely, but she said politely, "Yes, isn't it a delicious morning? Have you been far?" "Yes. No, way over there," with a vague gesture of her outflung arm. "I feel stifled in the house. I hate houses." Indeed. Flora could see that Elphine was about to get well away on a good long description of herself and her habits as these shy nymphs always did if you gave them half a chance. So she sat down on the turf in the sun. "Do you like poetry?" Elphine's hands were clenched. "Oh, some of it. I adore it. I write poetry. I'll show you some, if you promise not to laugh. I can't bear my children to be laughed at. I call my poems my children." Flora felt that she could promise this with safety. "And love, too. Love and poetry go together somehow. Out here on the hills when I'm alone, with my dreams. I can't tell you how I feel. I've been chasing a squirrel all morning." "Elphine, are you engaged?" "There's someone. We don't want to spoil things by having anything definite. It's horrible to bind anyone down." "Nonsense. It's a very good idea. Now, what do you suppose will happen to you if you don't marry this someone?" "Oh, I shall get a job in an arts and crafts shop in Horsham and do barbola work in my spare time. And later on I can go to Italy and perhaps learn to be a little like St. Francis of Assisi." "It is quite unnecessary for a young woman to resemble St. Francis of Assisi, and in your case it would be downright suicidal. A large girl like you must wear clothes that fit. And Elphine, whatever you do, always wear court shoes. Remember, C-O-U-R-T. You're so handsome that you can wear the most conventional clothes and do very well in them. But do, for heaven's sake, avoid orange linen jumpers and hand-brought jewellery. Oh, and shawls in the evening." But Flora saw that she'd been progressing too quickly. Elphine looked puzzled and wretched. Flora was penitent. She'd taken a fancy to the ridiculous girl. "Now, what is it? Tell me. Do you hate being at home?" "Yes, but I'm not often there. No, it's irk." Irk. That was the foxy-looking little man who was always staring at Flora's ankles or else spitting into the well. "What about Irk?" "I think grandmother means me to marry him when I'm 18. He climbs the apple tree outside my window and tries to watch me going to bed. I don't know what to do." It was at this moment that Flora resolved to rescue Elphine in the teeth of all the Starkadders. "And does someone know this?" "Well, I told him." "What did he say?" "Oh, he said, 'Rotten luck, old girl.'" "It's Dick Hawk Monitor, isn't it? Now, you must forgive my asking this, Elphine, but has he actually asked you to marry him?" "Well, he said he thought it would be a good idea if we did." "But does he seem to love you?" He does when I'm there, Flora, but I don't somehow think that he thinks much about me when I'm not there." It appeared there was a dangerous cousin named Pamela who came down for weekends. Dick thought she was great fun. Flora's spirits sank. And then there's this dance. Of course, I hate dancing, unless it's in the woods with the windflowers and the birds, but I did rather want to go to this one because, you see, it's Dick's 21st birthday, and somehow I think it would be rather fun.
And have you not been invited?
Oh, no. You see, Grandmother doesn't allow the Starkadders to accept invitations unless it's to funerals or the churching of women. So now no one sends us invitations. Dick did say he wished I was coming, but I think he was only being kind. Grandmother would be mad with rage if she thought I even knew Dick. She quarrelled with Mr. Hawke Monitor nearly 30 years ago. Besides, she thinks dancing is wicked.
Now listen, Elphine. I think it would be an excellent move if you went to this dance. I shall go too and keep an eye on you. I'll do my best to secure invitations for us, and then I'll take you up to town with me and we'll buy you a frock.
Oh, Flora!
When is this dance?
It's on the 21st of April, a month from tomorrow. They're holding it in the assembly rooms at Godmere, and all the county will be asked.
All the better, thought Flora. It will be easier to work an invitation. Surely someone among her friends in London would know these Hawke Monitors. Claude Hart Harris, for instance, and he could come down to partner her. But who could be an escort for Elphine? Does Seth dance? She asked her.
I don't know. I hate him.
I can't say I like him much myself, but you must have a partner, you know. The only other man Flora could think of who would be available was Mr. Maybug. She knew he would come bounding along to partner Elphine. It was dreadful to have no choice but Seth or Mr. Maybug, but Sussex was like that. Claude Hart Harris wrote a few days later in reply to Flora's letter. He thought he could arrange 4 invitations, as he knew the Hawke Monitors. Papa was dead. Mamma was a darling old bird whose hobby was the higher thought. He, Claude, would of course be charmed to partner Flora, but Seth sounded pretty squalid. Need he come? Squalid or not, said Flora, who had decided to answer his letter by telephone. He is all we can find unless we have Mr. Maybug. You know how dreadful intellectuals are when you take them to dances. Yes, said Claude. I think we'll rule out the Maybug. Well, I'll ask Mrs. Hawke Monitor to send the invitations direct to you. Flora came out of the post office in Beershorn feeling a little ashamed of her plans. She was scheming to palm off Elphine on the darling's only son. Well, Elphine would have to be transformed inside and out. Her artiness must be rooted out. She must write no more poetry. She must learn to be serious about horses, to laugh when a book or a string quartet was mentioned, and to confess that she was not brainy. Her mind must match the properly groomed head in which it was to be housed. And there were only 27 days in which to teach her all this. As Flora walked down the high street, she became aware that a man was trying to attract her attention. He looked like a Starkadder. Sure enough, it was Harkaway, one of the younger cousins. He returned her greeting in the Starkadder manner, that is, with a suspicious stare.
"You'm long way from home," he muttered.
So are you.
Aye, but I had business to do in the bank every Saturday. I come down with Viper.
And he jerked his head towards that disagreeable beast which Flora now saw anchored to the buggy.
Happen I might drive you home with me,
he suggested. That would be very kind of you. And they drove off together in the buggy. She looked at him and wondered what was his particular nastiness. She could hardly distinguish him from Irk or Carraway, Ezra, Luke, or Mark. Never mind. How's the well getting on? She said, to make conversation.
'Twas all collapsed. 'Twas Mark. He and our Mika was argufying, and Mark, he pushed Mika down the well and pushed the bricks down on top of un. Laugh, we fair lay on the ground.
Was Mika badly hurt?
Nay, but the bricks was lost.
A pity.
Aye, it is pity. There's summat cold comfort would do better for a few bricks thrown at their heads.
Who?
The old lady, hers has all of us under her thumb.
I cannot understand why you don't break away from her. I suppose she has all the money, but really, Harkaway, I do think it's carrying authority a little too far when grown men are prevented from marrying.
Nay, some of us is married right enough, but the old lady, she may never see our woman folk, or she go right away mad. The woman folk of the Starkadders keep themselves to themselves. They lives down in the village, and only comes up when there's gathering, or the old lady comes downstairs. There's Mika's Susan, Mark's Phoebe, Luke's Prue, Caraway's Letty, Ezra's Jane, Irk, I'm a bachelor. Me, I've got my own troubles.
And do you mean to say they all live down in the village? 5 women?
6 women,
corrected Harkaway.
Aye, there's another. There's poor daft Rennet.
Really? What relation is she to the others?
She my own daughter to Mika Susan by her first marriage to Mark, and Mark he my own half-brother to Amos, who's Mika's cousin, so 'tis rather confusing like. Aye, poor Rennet.
Well, what's the matter with her? Flora was exceedingly dismayed at the news there was a whole horde of female Starkadders whom she hadn't seen.
She were disappointed to one of the farmer hands 10 years ago. She never wed. She's queer like in her head. Sometimes when the sook bind hangs heavy from the parson wains, she jumps down the well. Aye, and twice she's tried to choke Miriam, the hired girl. 'Tis nature, you might say, turns sour in her veins.
But for the next 3 weeks, Flora was so busy with Elphine that she had no time to worry about the unknown female Starkadders. And when she had planed away from Elphine all the St. Francis cum Barbola work crust, she found beneath it an honest child, friendly and sweet-tempered, and fond of pretty things. Claude Hart Harris had told Flora she might expect the invitations about April the 19th, so she came down that morning with anticipation. Mrs. Beetle was shaking the mat out in the yard in the sunshine.
Nice morning,
she screamed. Big Business, the bull, suddenly bellowed his thick, dark red note. Flora looked thoughtfully across the yard to his shed. Mrs. Beetle, the bull ought to be let out. Can you help me do it? Are you afraid of bulls?
Yes, miss, I am afraid of bulls.
We could guide him towards the gate with a bull prong, or whatever it is, said Flora, glancing at an implement which lay across 2 hooks on the side of the shed.
No, miss.
Well, I shall open the gate and try to drive him through it into the field. You must wave your apron at him and shout.
Yes, miss, I'll go up to your bedroom window and shout at him from there.
A few seconds later, Flora heard her from overhead.
Go on, Miss Post, I'm here.
Flora was now extremely afraid. Big Business bellowed again. It was a harsh, mournful sound. She ran across the yard and pushed open the gate into the big field. Then she took down the bull prong and, standing some distance from the shed, manoeuvred the catch back. The door swung open. Out came Big Business. He stood for a second or two, bewildered by the light, with his big head swaying stupidly.
Go on, you old brute.
The bull lumbered off across the yard with his head down. Flora followed cautiously with the bull prong. Once he half turned, and she made a determined movement with the prong. Then, to her relief, he went through the gate into the field. She swung it to and shut it before he'd time to turn round.
There,
said Mrs. Beetle, reappearing at the door.
I told you so.
Flora replaced the bull prong and went back into the kitchen to make her breakfast. The postman should arrive any minute now. A minute later the door opened and Irk came in. He had been shooting rabbits. His narrow nostrils were distended slightly to inhale the blood odour from the 17 furry bodies which hung round his neck. He was drowsy with killing. Flora saw with dismay that he held a letter in his hand. He must have encountered the postman back in the lane. "My letter, please," she said. Irk turned it over curiously to look at a crest on the back of the envelope.
Who's writing to you from out Chicker Hall?
"Mary, Queen of Scots. Thanks." She twitched it out of his hand and slipped it into her pocket.
You're smart, aren't you? Think I don't know what's going on? She's mine, I tell you, mine. She were promised to me the day she were born by her grandma. I put a cross in Watervole's blood on her feeding bottle to mark her for mine. And every year on her birthday I've taken her up to Tickle Penny's and we've hung her with the old well until we see a Watervole. And I've said to her, remember. So you heed what I say, miss. Elfin's mine. I don't mind her being a bit above me, 'cause a man likes his piece to be a bit dainty. But she's mine.
We heard you said it before.
And God help the man or woman who tries to take her from me. Me and the Watervoles will get her back.
He turned with a peculiar stooping, stealthy, swooping movement and padded out of the kitchen.
"Well, I never," said Mrs. Beetle. "There's a nasty temper for you."
Flora decided that Elphine must be taken up to London this very day instead of tomorrow as planned. They must be sure of her dress and shorn head, whatever happened. If Irk suspected that they were going to the ball... She went upstairs to tell Elphine to get ready at once, and then hurried to find Seth. He was hanging over the fence round the big field, looking sullenly at Big Business, who was cantering round and round, bellowing.
"Someone's let the bull out,"
he said, pointing. "I know, I did, and quite time too. Seth, will you drive Elphine and me to Beershorn now to catch the 10:59 train?" The softly burning, perpetual ruby flame of romance in Seth responded to some tremor of urgency in her tones.
"Aye."
He lounged away to get the buggy. Adam appeared at the door of the cowshed.
Someone's let the bull out. It's terrible. I mun sue their feckless seem ourself who let out."
"I did." Distant shouts came from the back of the farm.
"The bull's out.
"Who let out Big Business?"
Oh, let loose.
"Aye, that's terrible."
Who let the bull out?"
screamed Judith from an upper window. Flora wrote on a piece of paper and pinned it on the kitchen door, where it could be seen by everyone as they came hurrying into the yard. It said, "I did. F. Post." The buggy came out into the yard with Viper in the shafts and Seth holding the reins, just as Elphine, wearing a deplorable blue cape, appeared at the door. "Jump up, my dear, we've no time to waste," cried Flora, climbing into the buggy. Seth struck Viper on the flanks, and they were off.
Seth had driven Elphine and Flora to the station, and they got safely away for their trip to London before Irk could do anything to stop them. He'd snarled at Flora that morning.
"Think I don't know what's going on? She's mine, I tell you, mine. She were promised to me the day she were born by her grandma. I put a cross in Watervole's blood on her feeding bottle to mark her for mine. And every year on her birthday I've taken her up to Tickle Penny's, and we've hung over the old well until we see a Watervole. And I've said to her, 'Remember.' So you heed what I say, miss. Elphin's mine. And God help the man or woman who tries to take her from me. Me and the Watervoles will get her back."
Flora decided that Elphine must be taken up to London this very day instead of tomorrow as planned. They must be sure of her dress and shorn head, whatever happened. If Irk suspected that they were going to the ball... They passed a pleasant day in London. Monsieur Viol of Knightsbridge cut Elphine's hair and dressed it in a careless, simple, expensive way that showed the tips of her ears. Flora then took her to Monsieur Solide, the couturier. His eyes widened as he looked at Elphine's broad shoulders, slim waist, and long legs. His fingers made the gestures of a pair of scissors, and he groped blindly towards a roll of snow-coloured satin, which a well-trained assistant put into his arms. "White?" asked Flora.
"But what else?"
He ripped the scissors across the satin.
"It is to wear white that God once in 100 years makes such a young girl."
The gown was ready for them to collect the following morning. "Well, how do you like your dress?" Flora asked Elphine as they sat at lunch. "It's heavenly. It's better than poetry, Flora." Flora looked at her benignly. The dress had cost 50 guineas, but she didn't grudge the sum. Judith had violently refused to take a penny of Flora's £100 to pay for her keep.
"We will never touch a halfpenny of Robert Post's money. Every middock you eat is paid for with our sweat. 'Tis as it should be, seeing the way things are."
So she was pleased to be spending the money on Elphine. That afternoon, to Flora's surprise, Seth was at Beershorn station to meet them with the buggy, and on the way home they stopped at a garage to arrange for a car to call at the farm the following evening to take them to Godmere. First it was to meet the 6:30 train to pick up a Mr. Hart Harris. "Are you looking forward to the ball, Seth?" Flora asked.
"Aye, 'twill be the first time I've ever been to a dance where all the women wasn't after me. I can enjoy myself for a change."
Flora had her doubts, but there was no point in alarming him beforehand. "But I thought you liked having the girls after you."
"Aye, I only likes the talkies. Many's the girl I've never seen again, 'cause she worrited me in the middle of a talkie. Aye, they're all the same. They must have your blood and your breath and every bit of your time and your thoughts. But I just likes the talkies."
Flora thought of a letter in her handbag. It was from Mr. Earl P. Neck, her Hollywood film producer friend. He was staying near Brighton and proposed motoring over to see her soon. She was going to introduce Seth to Mr. Neck. It was 5 o'clock the next day, April the 21st, a mild, rosy spring evening in which the blackbirds sang on the budding boughs of the elms and the air smelled of leaves and freshness. Flora and Elphine were getting themselves dressed for the ball. There were, of course, no bathrooms at Cold Comfort Farm, so Flora put 2 enormous noggins of water on the kitchen stove to get hot and hoped for the best. Her absence from the farm with Elphine hadn't been commented on, what with the bull getting out and Miriam, the hired girl, having so far got through the spring without entering upon her annual interesting condition, and the start of the carrot harvest. The Starkadders had enough to absorb them without noticing where a couple of girls had got to. But Aunt Adah, did she know? Elphine said she knew everything. She shuddered if Aunt Adah found out that they were going to the ball. "Well, she'd best not pull any Cinderella stuff on me," said Flora, peering into the noggins to see if the water was hot enough. "It's just possible she may come downstairs one of these evenings," said Elphine. "She sometimes does, in the spring." Flora said she hoped it kept fine for her. But she did rather wonder why the kitchen was decorated with a wreath of deadly nightshade round the mantelpiece, and large bunches of the evil-smelling pussy's dinner arranged in jam jars on the mantelpiece, and round the dim, ancient portrait of Fig Starkadder, Aunt Adah's deceased spouse, was a wreath of a flower unfamiliar to Flora. It had dark green leaves and long pink, tightly closed buds. She asked Elphine what it was. "That's the sook-bind. Oh, Flora, is the water done?" "So that's sook-bind, is it? I suppose when it opens, all the trouble begins." But Elphine was already away with the hot water to Flora's room, and she must follow her. Perhaps some pregnant quality in the restless air of the spring evening had infused itself into the room where Aunt Adah sat, for she struck fiercely upon the little bell that stood at her elbow. A plan she'd been pondering for days, and had even hinted to Seth, had suddenly matured. The shrill sound of the bell roused Judith, who was standing at the window looking with sodden eyes at the inexorable fecundity of the advancing spring.
"I mun go downstairs,"
said the old woman.
"Mother, you're mistaken. 'Tis not the 1st of May, nor the 17th of October. You'd better bide here."
"I tell you I must go downstairs. I must feel you all about me, all of you. Micah, Urk, Ezra, Harkaway, Caraway, Amos, Reuben, and Seth, and Mark and Luke. None of you must ever leave me. Give me my liberty bodice, girl."
Silently, Judith gave it to her. The old house was silent. The dying light lay quietly upon its walls, and the sound of the blackbird's song came into the still, empty rooms.
Now you were old and could not move easily. You leaned heavily upon Judith's shoulder as she pressed her foot into the small of your back to lace your corsets.
In her bedroom, Flora drew her curtains and lit the lamp. Elphine's dress lay on the bed, a lovely miracle. Flora brushed back the wings of her cousin's golden hair, slipped the foam of the petticoat over her head, stood on a chair to drop the dress over her head, and brushed again. Then she wrapped Elphine in the long evening coat of white velvet they'd also bought, put gloves and a bag into her hands, and made her sit on the bed out of dust and danger.
"Oh, Flora, do I look nice?"
"You look extremely beautiful. Mind you behave properly." Flora's own dress was in harmonious tones of pale and dark green. Now they were ready, but she was a little agitated. Would the car arrive safely with Claude? How would Seth look in a dinner jacket? Above all, would Richard Hawke Monitor propose to Elphine? He must speak.
Now you were putting on your elastic-sided boots. You hadn't worn them since Fig died. Fig, a prickly beard, a smell of flannel, a fumbling, urgent voice in the larder. Your boots smelled nasty. Where was the lavender water? You made Judith sprinkle some inside and out. Now your first petticoat.
Flora, said Elphine, I'm afraid I feel sick. Flora looked at her sternly. Suddenly there was a tap at the door. I expect it's only Seth. Flora tiptoed to the door. Indeed it was Seth, in a ready-made dinner jacket, which in no way destroyed his animal grace. He merely looked like a panther in evening dress. He whispered that a car was coming up the hill, and perhaps they'd best come downstairs. Is Irk anywhere about? Flora knew that if he could mess things up, he would.
I saw her hanging over the well up at Ticklepenny's talking to the water vowels an hour ago.
Oh, well, then he's safe for another half hour at least. Elphine, are you ready? Now, not a sound. Come along. By the light of the candle which Seth carried, they made their way safely down into the kitchen, which was deserted. A big car was just visible in the twilight, drawn up outside the yard gate, and Claude was peering out of its window. Flora waved reassuringly to him and caught the words, "Too barbarous," floating across the still evening air. She signalled frantically to him not to make a noise.
I'll carry Elphine. She mustn't spoil them shoes,
whispered Seth, with unexpected thoughtfulness. He picked his sister up and strode off with her across the yard, and made a second journey for Flora. She hardly had time to decide whether or not he was holding her unnecessarily tightly, when she found herself safely popped into the car and squeezing Claude's hand, with Elphine smiling prettily in the corner.
"My dear, why all this fall of the House of Usher stuff?" asked Claude. "I mean, this is too good to be true. Where do we go from here?"
They reached the assembly rooms in Godmere without mishap. Flora told the chauffeur to return at midnight, and asked how he proposed to spend the rest of the evening.
"I shall go to the talkies, madam."
"Aye, there's Jean Harlow in red dust at the Odeon," broke in Seth.
"Yes, that will do very well," said Flora, frowning slightly at him.
A red carpet led to the entrance of the assembly rooms, and on either side of it was assembled a large crowd of admiring sightseers. Just as Flora's party was going in, she thought she heard someone call her name, and perceived none other than Mr. Maybag, perilously poised upon the plinth of a lamp-post, and accompanied by another gentleman of disordered dress and wild appearance, whom she judged to be one of his intellectual cronies. Mr. Maybag waved gaily to Flora, and looked cheerful enough, but she, foolish creature, felt a little sorry for him, and almost wished he were coming to the ball.
"Who's that?" asked Claude.
"That's Mr. Maybag. Remember, I told you about him."
"Good God!"
Flora bowed very pleasantly to Mr. Maybag, who looked rather miserable, and tried to pull down his cardigan, which had worked up all wrinkly round his fat waist. In the assembly rooms, a broad flight of steps led down into the large ballroom. A handsome lady of some 60 years stood at the head of this staircase, and at her side was a large, healthy young woman in a cruel shade of electric blue. She, Flora rightly guessed to be Mrs. Hawke Monitor's daughter, Joan. Claude moved forward to present Flora and Elphine. Mrs. Hawke Monitor received Flora with a gracious smile, and her sudden, startled glance at Elphine was all that Flora could wish. Then Elphine, in response to a gentle nudge from Flora, began to descend the crimson-covered stairs. It was at this moment that the leisurely last notes of the waltz ceased, and the dancers below slowly came to a standstill and stood, clapping and smiling. Then a startled hush fell upon the clapping. All eyes were turned upon the staircase, and a low hum of admiration rose into the stillness. The slow descent of Elphine down the staircase was like the descent of a sunlit cloud down the breast of a mountain. Her candid beauty was set off by the snowy silver folds of her simple dress. Flora, watching from the head of the staircase, saw that a tall young man who stood just at its foot was looking up at Elphine as the young shepherd must have once looked at the moon goddess, and she was satisfied. The orchestra began to play a quick step. The young man, who was Richard Hawke Monitor himself, gave his hand to Elphine and led her into the dance. Flora had every reason to feel smug and satisfied with her evening's work as she floated round the room in the arms of Claude, who danced admirably. She overheard many comments upon Elphine's beauty, and was asked several times who was her lovely companion. She smilingly replied only that she was a cousin, a Miss Starkadder, and lived in the neighbourhood. Elphine danced most of the dances with Richard, but she gave some to the group of eager young men who gathered round her. Flora saw that Mrs. Hawke Monitor was beginning to look vaguely anxious. Seth appeared to be enjoying the evening immensely. A group of some 9 young persons whose dress proclaimed they'd come down from London for the ball took possession of him early in the evening and wouldn't let him go. Flora overheard 2 of the young women telling each other that, "My dear, he was too creditable and merely body-thrilling." Seth just smiled his slow, warm smile and drawled, "Aye and nay," when asked if he didn't adore farming and what he wanted from life, and didn't he think the important thing was to experience everything? While Flora and Claude were in the supper-room, Elphine and Richard came towards their table. They both looked peculiarly radiant. Elphine took Richard's hand and drew him forward. "Oh, Flora, I do say I want you to meet Dick." Flora bowed and smiled. "How do you do? I've heard so much about you." But she found her hand taken into a friendly clasp and met the beam of a wind-reddened, open, boyish countenance. "I say, I'm awfully glad to meet you. Elf's told me all about you, too. I say, this is jolly, isn't it? It was awfully decent of you to bring Elphine, Miss Post. I simply can't thank you enough. I mean, it's made all the difference in the world. We're engaged, as a matter of fact." "My dear, I'm delighted. I congratulate you." Flora was indeed overcome. "Charming," murmured Claude in the background. "We're going to announce it at the end of the evening," said Richard. "Good opportunity, what?" After Richard made the announcement from the balcony at midnight to a storm of clapping and congratulations, Flora went up the staircase to tackle Mrs. Hawke Monitor. She found the poor lady looking dazed. Flora went forward with outstretched hand. "Thank you so much. Such a lovely party." Mrs. Hawke Monitor looked at her very gravely. "Miss Post, I'll be quite frank with you. I cannot pretend I'm delighted at this engagement. Who is this young lady? I know next to nothing of her or her family." "Dear Mrs. Hawke Monitor, I'm sure you'll learn to like Elphine. She has many excellent qualities. She's only 17, and I think she can be moulded into exactly what you would wish her to be. As for her family, I should arrange that she sees next to nothing of them for the next few weeks. There'll probably be strong opposition to the match." "Opposition? What impertinence!" "Indeed, yes. Old Mrs. Starkadder has always intended Elphine to marry her cousin, Mr. Starkadder. I'm afraid there may be some opposition from him, too." Oh, dear. "I really do think it would be better if you could arrange for the wedding to take place in a month at the latest. I'm sure you don't want a lot of interference from the Starkadders, do you?" "Such a dreadful name, too." At this moment Seth and Claude arrived, ready to depart, so Mrs. Hawke Monitor had only time to press Flora's hand and murmur, "I'll think over what you say. Perhaps, after all, everything is for the best." So Flora went off in comparatively high spirits. After they had dropped Claude at his hotel, she shut her eyes and slept till the car was within 2 miles or so from the farm. And then she woke with a start. Voices had roused her. Seth was saying,
"Aye, and the old un'll have something to say about this night's work."
"Grandmamma can't stop me getting married."
"Maybe not, but she'll have a damn good try."
"She can't do much in a month," broke in Flora, And possibly Elphine will be staying with the Hawk monitors most of the time. She must just avoid Aunt Adah while she's in the house, that's all. Heaven knows it oughtn't to be very difficult to do, considering that Aunt Adah never leaves her room. Seth gave a low, gloating laugh. The car was just drawing up at the yard gate, and leaning past Flora, he pointed through the window with one thick finger at the farmhouse. Flora stared as he pointed and saw with a thrill of dismay that the windows of the farm were ablaze with light. "Oh, my goodness," said Flora. "It's Grandmamma." Elphine had gone very white. "She must have chosen this night of all nights to come downstairs and have the family party." "Nonsense. You don't have parties at places like Cold Comfort," said Flora, taking notes from her bag to pay the chauffeur. She got out of the car and put them into his hand. "There, thank you very much. Everything went off most satisfactorily. Good night." The chauffeur backed the car out of the yard and away down the lane towards the road. Then the friendly sound of the engine began to recede till it was absorbed into the vast quiet of the night. They turned and looked towards the house. The lights in the windows had a leering, waiting look. A thin wind snivelled among the rotting stacks of Cold Comfort. Darkness whined with the soundless urge of growth in the hedges. But that did not help any.
"Aye, 'tis grandmother," said Seth. "She moulding the counting. Aye, 'tis her, all right."
"What on earth," said Flora, picking her way across the yard, "is the counting, and why in the name of all that's inconvenient should it be held at 1:30 in the morning?"
"'Tis the record of the family that grandmother holds every year. See, we'm violent folk, we Starkadders. Some of 'em pushes others down wells. Some of 'em dies in childbirth. There's others as die of drink or goes mad. There's a whole heap on us, too. 'Tis difficult to keep count on us, so once a year grandmother, she holds a gathering called the counting, and she counts us all to see how many on us has died of the year.
Then she can count me out. Seth, had you any idea that your grandmother was going to hold this infernal counting tonight? She saw the gleam of his teeth in the darkness.
"Reckon I had."
"Then you're a crashing bounder. Now, Elphine, brace up. We are, I'm afraid, for it. You'd best not say a word. I will do the talking."
And she knocked at the door. The silence which swayed softly out from within to meet them was a tangible thing. It imposed and awed. It was broken by heavy footsteps. Someone was crossing the kitchen floor on hobnailed boots. A hand fumbled with the bolts. Then the door slowly opened, and Urk stood looking up at them, his foxy face twisted into a Japanese mask of lust, fury, and grief. Flora could hear Elphine's terrified breathing behind her and put out a comforting hand. It was clasped convulsively. The great kitchen was full of people. They were all silent and all painted over by the leaping firelight with a hellish red glow. Flora could distinguish Amos, Judith, Miriam the hired girl, Adam, Ezra, and Harkaway, Reuben, Carraway, Luke, and Mark, and several of the farmhands. They were all grouped in a rough semicircle about someone who sat in a great high-backed chair by the fire. A pungent scent came swooning out to meet the inrush of night air. Flora saw that the heat of the fire had caused the long pink buds of the sookbind to burst. The wreath which hung round the portrait of Fig Starkadder was covered with large flowers whose petals sprang back like snarling fangs to show the shameless heart that sent out full gusts of sweetness. Everybody was staring at the door. The silence was terrific, and the flickering of the light and the fire glow upon the faces of the Starkadders emphasized the strange stillness of their bodies. Flora was just trying to decide what the kitchen looked like and came to the conclusion that it was the Chamber of Horrors at Madame Tussaud's. "Well, well," she said, stepping over the doorway and drawing off her gloves. "The gang is all here, isn't it? Is that big business I see in the corner? Oh, beg your pardon, it's Mika. I suppose there aren't any sandwiches?" This cracked the social ice a bit. Signs of life were observed. "There's food on the table," said Judith, coming forward with her burning eyes fixed upon Seth.
But first, Robert Poste's child, you must greet your Aunt Adah Doom.
She took Flora's hand and led her up to the figure which sat in the high-backed chair by the fire.
Mother, she said, this is Flora, Robert Poste's child. I have spoken to you of her.
How do you do, Aunt Adah? Said Flora, putting out her hand. But Aunt Adah made no effort to take it. She folded her own hands a little more closely upon a copy of the Milk Producers' Weekly Bulletin and Cowkeeper's Guide, which she held on her lap, and observed,
I saw something nasty in the woodshed.
Flora turned to Judith with raised eyebrows. A murmur came from the rest of the company, which was watching closely.
"'Tis one of her bad nights," said
Judith, whose gaze kept wandering piteously towards Seth. He was wolfing cold beef in a corner.
"Mother, don't you know me? It's Judith. I have brought Flora Poste to see you. Robert Poste's child."
No, I saw something nasty in the woodshed,
said Aunt Adah, fretfully moving her great head from side to side.
'Twas a burning noonday 69 years ago, and me no bigger than a titty wren, and I saw something
Yes, well, perhaps she likes it better that way, said Flora. She'd been observing Aunt Adah's firm chin, clear eyes, tight little mouth, and close grip upon the Milk Producers' Weekly Bulletin and Cowkeeper's Guide, and she decided that if Aunt Adah was mad, then she, Flora, was one of the Marx brothers.
Saw something nasty in the woodshed,
suddenly shrilled Aunt Adah, smiting at Judith with the Milk Producers' Weekly Bulletin.
Something nasty. Take it away. You're all wicked and cruel. You want to go away and leave me alone in the woodshed, but you never shall. None of you, never. There have always been Starkadders and cold comfort. You must all stay here with me, all of you. Judith, Amos, Mika, Luke, Ezra, Mark, Elfin, Caraway, Harkaway, Reuben, and Seth. Where's Seth? Where's my darling? Come here, Seth.
Seth came pushing his way through the crowd with his mouth full of beef and bread. "Here, Grandma," he crooned. "Here I am. I'll never leave ye, never."
Well, that's my good boy, my mommet, my pipit,
murmured the old woman, patting Seth's hand with the Milk Producers' Weekly Bulletin.
Why, how grand he is tonight. What's this? What's all this?
And she jerked at Seth's dinner jacket.
What have you been doing, boy? Tell your granny.
Flora could see from the way in which Aunt Adah's remarkably shrewd eyes beneath their heavy lids were examining Seth's person that she had rumbled their little outing. So she took a deep breath. "He's been to Godmere, to Richard Hawke Monitor's 21st birthday dance. So have I. So has Elfine. And what is more, Aunt Adah, Elfine and Richard Hawke Monitor are engaged to be married, and will be married too, in about a month from now."
Came a terrible cry from the shadows near the sink. Everybody started violently and turned to stare. It was Irk lying face downwards in the beef sandwiches, with one hand pressed upon his heart in dreadful agony. The hired girl, Miriam, laid her rough hand upon his bowed head and timidly patted it, but he shook her off with a movement like a weasel in a trap.
My Elfine, my little water vole, my little water vole.
A babble broke out in which Aunt Adah could be dimly discerned beating at everybody with the Milk Producers' Weekly Bulletin and Cowkeeper's Guide.
I saw it. I shall go mad. I can't bear it. There have always been Starkadders and cold comfort. I saw something nasty in the woodshed. Something nasty.
Seth took her hands and held them in his, kneeling before her and speaking wooingly to her. Flora had dragged Elphine up onto a table in a corner and was feeding them both on bread and butter. She observed several unknown females flitting dejectedly about in the gloom, replenishing plates with bread and butter, and occasionally weeping in corners. "Who's that?" she asked Elphine, and pointed with interest at one who had a perfectly flat bust and a face like a baby bird, all goggle eyes and beaky nose. This one was weeping half inside the boot cupboard. "'Tis poor Rennet," said Elphine. "Oh, Flora, I'm so happy, but I do wish we could go to bed, don't you?" "Presently, yes. So that's poor Rennet, is it? Why, if it isn't tactless to ask, are her clothes sopping wet?" "Oh, she jumped down the well about 11 o'clock. Miriam, the hired girl, told me. Grandmamma kept on mocking at her because she's an old maid. She said Rennet couldn't even keep a tight hold on a man when she had got him, and poor Rennet had hysterics. And then Grandmamma kept on saying things about flat bosoms and things, and then Rennet ran out and jumped down the well, and Grandmamma had an attack." Serve her right, the old trout.
Hey, what's up now? For a renewed uproar had broken out in the midst of the crowd gathered around Aunt Adah's chair.
Flora, Seth, and Elphine had returned from the ball to Cold Comfort Farm to find the whole Starkadder family gathered by Aunt Adah Doom for the counting. Aunt Adah had already had one fit of hysterics over Elphine's engagement to Richard Hawke Monitor.
I saw it. I shall go mad. I can't bear it. There have always been Starkadders at Cold Comfort. I saw something nasty in the woodshed. Something nasty.
Flora had dragged Elphine up onto a table in a corner and was feeding them both on bread and butter. She'd given up all hope of getting to bed that night. It was nearly 2:30.
Hey, what's up now? For a renewed uproar had broken out in the midst of the crowd gathered around Aunt Adah's chair.
Peering through the confusing flicker of the firelight, Flora and Elphine could distinguish Amos, who was bending over Aunt Adah and thundering at her.
"So I mun go where the Lord's work calls me to go. I mun go abroad in one of they Ford vans, preaching all over the countryside. Aye, like the apostles of old. I've heard me call, and I mun follow it."
He flung his arms wide and stood with the firelight playing upon his exalted face.
"No, no!" screamed Aunt Adah. "I cannot bear it. There have always been Starkadders at Cold Comfort. You mustn't go. None of you must go. I shall go mad. I saw something nasty in the woodshed.
She struggled to her feet, supported by Seth and Judith, and struck at Amos with the Milk Producer's Weekly Bulletin and Cowkeeper's Guide, which was looking a bit the worse for wear by this time. Amos's eyes were fixed triumphantly upon some far-off ecstatic vision.
"I mun go this very night. I hear the glad voices of angels calling me out over the ploughed fields where the little seedlings is clapping their hands in prayer. And besides, I arranged with Agony Beetle's brother to pick me up in the London milk van at 3:30, so I've no time to lose. Aye, 'tis goodbye to ye all. Mother, I've broken your chain at last, with the help of the angels and the Lord's word. Where's me act?"
Reuben silently handed it to his father. He'd had it ready for the last 10 minutes.
Aunt Adah sat huddled in her chair, breathing feebly, striking impotently at the air with the Milk Producer's Weekly Bulletin and Cowkeeper's Guide.
Aye, so you go and leave me in the woodshed. I shall go mad. I shall die here, alone, in the woodshed with nasty things.
She wrung her hands distractedly as though to free them of some obscene spiritual treacle.
Pressing on me, alone, alone.
Her head sank into her breast.
Amos moved with great, slow steps to the door. No one moved. He jerked open the door.
Amos!
It was a screech from her heart roots. It buried itself in his plexus. But he never turned. He stepped blunderingly out into the dark and was gone. Suddenly there was a wild cry from the corner in the shadows by the sink. Irk came stumbling forward, dragging the hired girl, Miriam, in his wake. Flora woke up Elphine, who'd gone to sleep, and pointed out that some more fun was just beginning. It was only 3:30. Irk was chalk white. A trail of blood drooled down his chin. He was laughing insanely. Miriam shrank back from him, livid with fear.
Me and the water vowels, we failed, he babbled. We're beaten. We planned a nest for her Elphine up there by Ticklepenny's well where the eggplants was in bloom. And now she's given herself to him, the dirty stuck-up lion. When she were an hour old, I made a mark on her feeding bottle in water vowel's blood. She were mine, see? Mine. And I've lost her.
He turned upon Miriam, who shrank back in terror.
Come here, you. I'll take you instead. Aye, dirt as you are, I'll take you, and we'll sink into the mud together. There've always been Starkadders at cold comfort, and now there'll be a beetle too.
And not the first, neither, as you'd know if you've ever cleaned out the larder, said a voice.
It was Mrs. Beetle herself.
Well, who's talking about dirt? Heaven knows you should know something about it in that coat and them trousers. Enough to turn up one of your precious water vowels. I pity you don't spend a little less time with them, and a bit more with a soap and flannel.
She turned to Miriam.
Don't you have him, Ducky, unless you feel like it. You're full young yet, and he won't see 40 again.
I don't mind. I'll have him if he wants me, said Miriam. I can always make him wash a bit if I feels like it.
Irk gave a wild laugh. He drew her to him and pressed a savage kiss full on her open mouth. Aunt Adah, choking with rage, struck at them with the Milk Producer's Weekly Bulletin, but missed. She fell back, gasping.
Come, my beauty, snarled Irk. My handful of dirt I mun carry up to Ticklepenny's and show ye to the water vowels.
His face was working with passion.
What, at this time of night?
Cried Mrs. Beetle. Irk put one arm round Miriam's waist and heaved away, but could not budge her from the floor. He cursed, and kneeling down, placed his arms about her middle and heaved again. She did not stir. One of the farm hands was heard to suggest that the fireman's lift was as good a hold as any he knew. Now Irk made Miriam stand in the middle of the floor, and with a low, passionful cry, ran at her.
Come, my beauty!
The sheer animal weight of the man bore her up into his clutching arms. Harkaway held open the door, and Irk and his burden rushed out into the dark and earthy scents of the young spring night. A silence fell. As though frozen, the crowd in the kitchen waited for the distant crash which should tell them that Irk had fallen down. Pretty soon it came, and Harkaway shut the door. It was now 4 o'clock. Elphine had gone to sleep again. So had most of the farmhands. Flora was desperately sleepy. There was no doubt that the fun was wearing a bit thin. Judith, huddled in a corner, was looking broodingly at Seth. Reuben was brooding in another corner. The silk-bind flowers were fading. Seth was studying a copy of Photo Bits. Only Aunt Ada Doom sat upright, her eyes fixed upon the distance. Her lips moved softly. Flora could just make out what she was saying, and it sounded none too festive.
2 of them gone, Elphine, Amos, and I'm all alone in the woodshed now. Who took them away? I must know. That chit, that brat,
Robert Post's child.
Poor daft Rennet had crept forward until she was near her great-aunt, and stood looking down at her with a mad glare in her pale eyes. Suddenly, without turning round, Aunt Adah struck at her with the Milk Producer's Weekly Bulletin, and Rennet fled back to her corner. Suddenly Flora felt a draught at her back. Reuben had opened the little concealed door behind the great bulge of the chimney-piece, which led out into the yard. "Come on," he whispered. "'Tis time ye were in bed." Flora woke Elphine, and Reuben drew them safely through the door. The way to their beds lay clear before them. "Reuben," said Flora, "you are an utter lamb." "Well, you got the old devil out of the way for me." "Oh, that? Aye, and I don't forget. The farm will be mine now, surely." "So it will. Such fun for you." Suddenly, a shocking row broke out in the kitchen behind them.
The Starkadders were off again.
The next day was Sunday. Prue, Susan, Letty, Phoebe, and Jane had been escorted back to Howling by Adam at 5:30 that morning, and he had returned just in time to begin the milking. He was still bewildered by Elphine's betrothal. The sound of old wedding bells danced between the tufts of hair in his withered ears, and catches of country rhymes sung before George the Fourth was born.
Come rue, come snow, so maidies mun go.
He sang over and over again to himself as he milked feckless. The dawn widened into an exquisite spring day. Judith sat in the kitchen, looking out with leaden eyes across the disturbed expanse of the teeming countryside. Rennet huddled by the fire, stirring some rather nasty jam she had suddenly thought she would make. She'd decided to stay behind when the other female Starkadders went off home. Her flayed soul shrank from their unspoken pity. Old Adah Doom kept to her room, when she'd been carried at 6 o'clock that morning by Mika, Seth, Mark, Caraway, and Harkaway. None dared go into her. She sat alone, a huddled vast ruin of flesh, staring unseeingly out between her wrinkled lids. Powerless waves of fury coursed over her inert body. Sometimes names burst out of her green lips.
Amos, Elphine, Urk.
Sometimes they just stayed inside. No one had seen anything of Urk and Miriam. It was generally assumed that he had drowned her and then himself. As for Flora, she was still asleep at 3:30 in the afternoon, but she was aroused by a knock and the excited voice of Mrs. Beetle saying that there was 2 gentlemen to see her. "Who are they? I mean, did they tell you their names?" "One's that Mr. Mybug, miss, and the other's a gentleman who says his name's Neck." "Oh, yes, of course, how delightful. Ask them both to wait till I come down. I won't be long." She was delighted at the idea of seeing her dear Mr. Neck again, her Hollywood film producer friend. As for Mr. Mybug, well, she could cope with him. As she entered the little parlour, Mr. Neck held out his hands to her.
Well, 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 sweetheart, how's the girl?
Flora greeted him with warmth. Mr. Mybug was looking rather sulky and miserable because he'd hoped to find Flora alone and have a lovely long scene with her, apologizing for his behaviour at the assembly rooms last night. Flora asked Mrs. Beetle to bring them some tea, and she quietly told her to send Seth to the parlour as soon as he could be found.
"Are you over here looking for English film stars, Mr. Nick?"
asked Mr. Mybug.
Yeah, that's so. I want to find me a big husky stiff that smells of the outdoors with a golden voice. I want passion. I want red blood. I don't want no sissies, see? Sissies give me a pain in the neck, and they're beginning to give the great American public a pain in the neck, too.
"Do you know the work of Lymph?"
asked Mr. Mybug.
Never heard of 'em. I want a man to fetch the women, someone who can look good in a tuxedo and yet handle one of them old-world plows.
While Mr. Neck was speaking, Seth came silently with his graceful, pantherish tread into the room. Mr. Neck looked up, and he saw Seth. A silence fell. Seth's pose was easy and graceful. A superb self-confidence radiated from him.
He met Mr. Neck's stare with an impudent stare of his own, his head lowered and slightly forward. He looked exactly what he was, the local sexually successful bounder. Mr. Neck broke the silence, flinging up his hand.
That's it, sweetheart. That's got it. Hold it.
And Seth was so soaked in movie slang that he held it. Then Flora said, "Oh, Seth, there you are. I wanted Mr. Neck to meet you. Earl, this is my cousin, Seth Starkadder. He is very interested in the talkies. Mr. Neck is a talkie producer, Seth." And when Seth's deep, warm drawl came, "Pleased to meet you, Mr. Neck," Mr. Neck looked up with an expression of delight.
Well, well,
he said, surveying Seth, rather as though Seth were his dinner, as indeed he was to be for some years to come.
How's the boy? So you're a fan, eh? You and me must get acquainted. Maybe you'd thought of going in for the game yourself. No, I'm not kidding. I mean it. Would you like to go on the talkies?
A great cry broke from Seth.
More than anything else in the world. Well, ain't that dandy? He wants to be a movie star, and I want to make him one. Usually it's just the other way about. Now, sweetheart, get your grip, and we'll be off. We're catching the boat from Southampton tonight. Say, though, what about your folks? What about Mama? Will she need squaring?
I'll tell you all about that, Earl, said Flora. Seth, go and pack a bag with everything you need for the trip. Seth obeyed, and when he had gone, she explained the Starkadder setup to Mr. Neck. Seth returned, carrying his suitcase. His face bore its usual expression of insolent complacency. Of course he was going to be a film star. Once he'd got over the first shock, the whole affair seemed perfectly natural to him. They were all standing round the car saying goodbye when the ominous sound of a window being pushed up was heard, and a voice floated out into the quiet air. It was observing that it had
seen something nasty in the woodshed.
Everybody looked up, Flora with some dismay. Sure enough, it was Aunt Adah Doom leaning heavily out of the window. A shape hovered behind her left shoulder. It was Judith. Another shape hovered behind the right shoulder. It was Rennet. "Oh, mercy," said Flora to Mr. Neck. "Hurry up and go."
Seth, where are you going?"
throbbed Judith.
I saw something nasty in the woodshed,
screamed Aunt Adah, flapping about her with something which Flora recognized as all that was left of the Milk Producer's Weekly Bulletin.
My baby, my darling, you mustn't leave me. I shall go mad. I can't bear it.
"Can it?" muttered Mr. Neck, but aloud he called politely, waving his hand.
"Oh, well, how's the girl?"
"Seth, you mustn't go,"
implored Judith.
"You can't leave your mother. There's the spring onion harvest. 'Tis man's work. You mustn't go."
I saw something nasty in the woodshed.
"Did it see you?"
asked Mr. Neck, tucking himself into the car beside Seth. "Goodbye," said Seth to Flora, who returned his condescending smile with a friendly one. She watched the car drive away. It was going to Hollywood, to Cloud Cuckoo Land. Already, as the car receded, he had become unreal.
Seth!
The car turned the curve and was gone. Aunt Adah had now retreated from the window. Flora could hear Judith having hysterics. Mr. Maybag, who had been a peevish onlooker at this scene, was now staring up at Aunt Ada's window, where Rennet had suddenly appeared and was peering palely out into the evening.
"Who is that?"
he said. "Rennet Starkadder," said Flora.
"What a marvellous face,"
he said, still staring.
"She has a brittle, hair-like quality, don't you feel it?"
He waved his fingers about.
"She has that untamed look you'll sometimes see in newly-born leverets. I wish Kropotkin could see her. He'd want to put her into plaster."
Rennet was staring down at him, too. Flora could see it was quite a case. Oh, well, it would be a good thing if he carried Rennet off to Fitzroy Square and set a new fashion in hair-faced beauties.
Rennet was very domesticated. She would mend his clothes and cook him lovely, nourishing dinners and fuss over him and simply adore him, and he would become so comfortable he wouldn't know himself. Mr. Maybach walked across the yard until he stood directly underneath the window and called up to Rennet,
I say, will you come for a walk with me?
"Well, what now?" asked Rennet. Nobody had asked her to do such a thing before.
Oh, why not?
Mr. Maybach was looking boyishly up at her with his head flung back.
I must ask Cousin Judith,
said Rennet, glancing timidly over her shoulder. She withdrew into the shadows. Mr. Maybach was very pleased with himself. This was his idea of romance. Flora could see. It was all very simple, gay, and natural somehow. Flora told Mr. Maybach she hoped he would have a pleasant walk. He attempted to catch her hand.
We are friends, aren't we?
Certainly.
There's a quality in you, remote and nymph-like, oddly unawakened. I should like to write a novel about you and call it Virginal.
Do, if it passes the time for you, and I really must go and write some letters. Goodbye. On her way back to the parlour, she passed Rennet coming downstairs, dressed to go out. She darted past Flora with a stare of terror. Mrs. Beetle was in the parlour, clearing away the tea things.
Miss Elphine sent you her best love, Miss Flora, and she's gone over to spend 6 weeks at Howchicker Hall. Mr. Dick come for her at lunchtime in his motor.
Oh, so she's gone, has she? Oh, well, that's splendid. And where's Irk? It isn't true he's drowned Miriam. Mrs. Beetle snorted.
Take more than him to drown her. No, he's as large as life and twice as natural down at my house playing with the kids.
What, with Miriam's children?
Yes, giving them rides on his back and pretending he's a water bowl. Nasty things.
Is she going to marry him? Mrs. Beetle gave her a look.
So I should hope, Miss Post. I don't say as there's been anything wrong between them yet, but there ain't going to be neither till they're safely married.
And what does old Mrs. Starkadder say to Irk marrying Miriam?
She said she saw something nasty, as usual, and if I had sixpence for all the nasty things I've seen since I've been working at Cold Comfort, I could buy the place up. Not that I want to come to that.
I suppose you haven't any idea of what she really did see? Mrs. Beetle paused in the act of folding the tablecloth and regarded Flora earnestly, but all she said was that she couldn't say she was sure. So Flora pursued her inquiries no further. Her satisfaction with the way matters were progressing at the farm was completed in the evening by the arrival of a postcard for herself. It represented Canterbury Cathedral, and on the back was written,
Praise the Lord. This morning I preached the Lord's word to thousands in the marketplace. I am now going out to hire one of the Ford vans. Praise the Lord. Send my flannel shirts. Fond love to all. A. Starkadder.
The first fortnight of May brought a burst of summer weather. The rays of sunshine fell into the room where Judith lay on her bed in silence and were withered. Flies buzzed above her head in idiotic circles. She had veiled each of the 200 photographs of Seth with a little black crepe curtain. This done, what else did life hold? The old woman kept her room also. It was her citadel. Outside, the world she had built up so fiercely for 20 years was crumbling into fantastic ruin.
It was she, Robert Post's child. The wrong done to him had come back to roost. Curses like rookses flies home to rest in bosomses and barnses.
Elphine was still at Howchicker Hall, and Flora had been there to tea. Mrs. Hawk Monitor seemed quite won over to Elphine, and described her to Flora as
a dull little thing, rather brainy, but quite a nice little thing.
The wedding was fixed for June the 14th, and was to take place in the church at Howling, which was a beauty. Mrs. Hawk Monitor then stunned Flora by suggesting the reception should be held at Cold Comfort.
So much more convenient than coming all the way back here, don't you think? Is there a large room at the farmhouse, Miss Post?
Several, said Flora faintly, thinking about them.
Splendid, just the thing.
So there was a new horror on the horizon. It was true, though, that matters were better at the farm since Reuben had taken over. Wages were paid regularly, rooms were swept out occasionally, and Mika, Ezra, and the other men had taken advantage of Aunt Ada's temporary setback to command Prue, Letty, Phoebe, etc., to come up from the village to live at the farm, so there they all were. And wherever Flora went, she seemed to stumble over hen-faced female Starkadders in cotton dresses. And she'd shown Reuben another postcard she'd had from Amos.
Praise the Lord. I go to spread the Lord's word among the heathen Americans with the Reverend Elderberry Shiftglass of Chicago. Praise the Lord. Tell Reuben he can have the old place. Send clean socks. A. Starkadder.
Flora decided that she must tackle Judith next. She'd been lying in her room with the window shut quite long enough. When she'd tapped at the door and entered, she'd found Judith standing at her washstand, rinsing one of the little crepe curtains which hung over the 200 photographs of Seth. "Oh, Cousin Judith, would you care to come up to town with me tomorrow? I want to do some shopping, and I've arranged to have lunch with a very charming Austrian friend of mine, Dr. Mudel from Vienna. Do come." Judith's laugh shocked even the careless flies that circled above her head into a momentary silence.
"I am a dead woman,"
she said. Her hands lay piteously at her sides.
"Look, the little curtain was dusty. I had to rinse the dust off it."
Flora refrained from pointing out that if you rinsed something that was dusty, you merely made it worse. She said patiently that she proposed to catch the 10:30 to London, and she would expect Judith to come too. "You mustn't carry on like this, you know. It depresses us all no end. I mean, all this lovely weather and what not. A pity to waste it."
"I myself am a waste. I'm a used husk, a rind, a skin. What use am I now he's gone?"
"Well, never mind that now. Just you make up your mind to be ready tomorrow morning." Her day with Judith in London was a complete success. True, Judith's hair fell down every 15 minutes and had to be repinned by Flora, and then there were the sympathetic inquiries of fellow travellers to be fobbed off, who were naturally intrigued to hear Judith refer to herself at intervals as a used good and a rind. But once seated opposite Dr. Mudel and Judith at a quiet table in the restaurant, she watched with a feeling of relief Dr. Mudel taking command of the situation, and observing how soon Judith began to glow darkly and do the slumbering volcano act in Dr. Mudel's direction, Flora couldn't help admiring the skill with which, as a brilliant psychoanalyst, he had effected the transference in the course of a commonplace conversation throughout lunch. "She will be all right now," he murmured to Flora when lunch was over, while Judith was gazing broodingly out of the window. "I shall take her to my clinic and let her talk to me. There she will stay for 6 months, perhaps, and then I send her abroad for a little holiday. And make her interested in old churches, I think. Yes, old churches. There are so many in Europe, it will take her the rest of her life to see them all. She has money, yes? Well, that's all right then. Do not distress yourself. She will be quite happy. All that energy. Oh, it is a pity, yes. It all turns in instead of out. Now I turn it out onto the old churches, yeah." Judith looked happier already. Her eyes followed every movement of Dr. Mudel. Flora had never seen her so animated. "I understand you're going to stay with Dr. Mudel for a while, Cousin Judith."
"He has asked me. He's very kind. There is a dark force in him. It beats like a black gong. I wonder you do not feel it."
"Oh, well, we can't all strike lucky. But I do think it'll do you no end of good. Set you up and what not. Don't worry about the farm. Reuben will look after that for you and send you a fat piece out of the takings every month. You enjoy yourself while you're young." Before they said goodbye, Flora arranged to send on to the clinic the 5 dirty red shawls and sundry bundles of hairpins, which seemed to make up the greater part of Judith's wardrobe. It was with a feeling of satisfaction and with something strangely like affection that she surveyed the farmhouse on her return that evening. But then she looked up at the closed, blank face of Aunt Adah's window, and her face grew pensive. Aunt Adah was still there, fighting her losing battle. Aunt Adah, the spirit of cold comfort, was hard-pressed but still undefeated. And could Flora really congratulate herself upon her work at the farm, while Aunt Adah, 'Ada' 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 Flora had left Cousin Judith happy and transfigured in the soothing care of Dr. Moodle, the psychoanalyst. And when she returned to Cold Comfort that evening, she found Mrs. Beetle at the gate.
"Your supper's on the table, Duck. Cold veal and salad and blancmange. I'm off home now."
"Thank you, Mrs. Beetle. Miss Judith won't be back tonight. She's going to stay in London for a while. Has everything been all right?"
"She took on something awful about Miss Judith going off this morning,"
said Mrs. Beetle, glancing upwards at Aunt Ada Doom's closed window.
"Said she was all alone in the woodshed now, and no mistake. Still, she keeps her appetite, I will say that for her. 3 helpings of veal and 2 of suet roly for her dinner today. Can you beat it?"
Flora went into the kitchen, where she found a letter from Charles propped against a jam jar on the table. Her brief notes to this tall, dark, serious second cousin of hers, whom she rather liked, had brought regular replies, which she seemed to find mightily satisfying. They had cheered her exile at Cold Comfort. Elphine's wedding reception at the farm was to be held on Midsummer Day. Flora was anxious that the farm shouldn't disgrace Reuben and his sister, so she told him that she must have money to buy decorations and a feast for the wedding guests. Reuben seemed pleased at the idea of holding the reception at the farm and gave her £30, but added, glancing meaningly up at the ceiling,
"What about the old un?"
"Leave her to me," said Flora. "I am thinking out a plan for coping with her. Well, thank you so much for the money, my lamb. I will see about decorations and food at once. Oh, and need we have all the pictures wreathed with that smelly sook bind? I'm afraid it might have a bad effect on Miriam and Rennet. They're so easily upset."
"'Twas no choice of mine. 'Twas grandmother's choice. Do as you please, Cousin Flora. I never wants to see a sprig of it again."
So Flora began her preparations, and in the intervals of superintending a simply colossal spring cleaning of the farm, the first it had received for 100 years, she kept a weather eye upon the affair of Mr. Maybug and Rennet. She was well aware that marriage was not the intellectual's long suit, and she didn't want Rennet landed with a shameful bundle. Mr. Maybug, however, did ask Rennet to marry him. He said that,
"By God, D.H. Lawrence was right when he had said there must be a dumb, dark, dull, bitter belly tension between a man and a woman. And how else could this be achieved save in the long monotony of marriage?"
As for Rennet, she accepted him at once and was perfectly happy choosing saucepans. So that was all right, and they were to be married at a register office in London and have a share in Elphine's reception afterwards. As the evenings grew longer towards midsummer, Flora would sit alone in the little parlour where the scent of the may-tree came in through the open window, reading. On an evening of more than common peace and beauty, she was eating her supper and had opened a novel by Jane Austen with which to refresh her spirits. It was Mansfield Park, and her eye lighted upon this sentence. It was over, however, at last, and the evening set in with more composure to Fanny. And suddenly the flash. It was over indeed, her long indecision and her bewilderment about how to deal with Aunt Ada Doom. In a few seconds she had her plan clearly in her head. Calmly she scribbled out a telegram. Hart Harris, Chiswick Mall, London. Please send at once latest number Vogue, also prospectus Hotel Miramar, Paris, and very important photographs Fanny Ward. Love, Flora. Then she sent Adam down to the post office in Howling with it. There was now only a week to go before the wedding. Claude Hart Harris didn't fail her. The papers arrived within a couple of days, and Flora made sure that all the things for which she'd asked were there. Then, as it was midday, she asked Mrs. Beetle to give her the tray on which was arranged Aunt Ada's lunch.
"Go on, you'll strain yourself," said Mrs. Beetle. "It weighs about 1/2 weight."
But Flora quietly took the tray, and under the awed eyes of Reuben, Mrs. Beetle, Sue, Phoebe, Jane, and Letty, she arranged upon it the copy of Vogue, the prospectus of the Hotel Miramar in Paris, and the photographs of Miss Fanny Ward, that famous personality of stage and society who always looked so astoundingly young for her considerable age. "I'm going to take her lunch up to Aunt Adah," Flora announced. "If I haven't come down by 3 o'clock, Mrs. Beetle, will you kindly bring up some lemonade? At 4:30 you may bring up some tea. If I'm not down by 7, please bring up a tray with supper for 2, and we will have hot milk and biscuits at 10. Now, goodbye, all of you. I beg of you not to worry. All will be well." And slowly, before their fascinated gaze, she climbed the stairs to Aunt Adah's chamber, bearing the tray of lunch steadily before her. They heard the light sound of her footsteps receding along the corridor, then her tap on the door. "I brought your lunch, Aunt Adah. May I come in? It is Flora." There was a silence. Then the door was heard to open, and Flora and the tray of lunch passed within. And that was the last anyone heard or saw of her for nearly 9 hours. Mrs. Beetle took up the refreshments as she'd been instructed. Each time she returned, she found the empty plates and cups packed neatly outside to the closed door. From within, there came the steady rise and fall of voices, but she couldn't distinguish a word, and this disappointing information was all she had to carry back to the eagerly waiting group downstairs. At 7 o'clock, Mr. Maybug and Rennet had joined them, and they were all talking away so hard that they never heard the clock strike 10, and it wasn't until nearly 1:15 that Mrs. Beetle leapt from her chair. "There now, I forgot the milk. Oh, I'll take it up at once." But someone was coming slowly downstairs with light steps that dragged a little, and through the doorway walked Flora. She looked composed enough, but rather pale and sleepy. "Hello," she said. "You're all here, then? Hello, Mr. Maybug. Surely it's time you were in bed. Can I have that milk now, please, Mrs. Beetle? You needn't take any up to Aunt Adah. I've put her to bed. She's asleep." There was a gasp of wonder from everybody. Flora sank into the chair with a long yawn.
"We was afeard for his soul,"
said Letty after a pause. They were all pop-eyed with curiosity.
"Done a many times we near come up to fetch ye down again."
"Too nice of you, but it was quite all right, really. Everything's settled now. You needn't worry, Reuben. There will be no fuss at the wedding or anything. We can go right ahead. In fact, everything ought to be rather good in one way and another."
"Cousin Flora, no one but he could have done it," said Reuben. "I suppose he wouldn't tell us how it was done."
"Well, it's a long story. You'll see when the time comes. On the wedding day, I mean. It will be a lovely surprise. I can't tell you now. It would spoil things." "Oh, you just wait and see." Her voice dwindled into silence, and she was asleep. "Like a tired child," said Mr. Maybug, who, like most of your brutal intellectuals, was as soft as cheese underneath. "Just like a little tired child." And he was just reaching out in a dreamy, absent kind of way to stroke Flora's hair when Mrs. Beetle gave a sharp dab at his hand. "Paws off, Pompey!" This so much upset him that he marched off home, pursued by the wailing Rennet, without pausing to make any farewells. Mrs. Beetle then shoved the other women off to their own chambers and roused Flora from her sleep. She smiled at Reuben as she took her candle from him.
"Good night, Cousin Flora. It were a good day for cold comfort when you first come here."
"Oh, my dear soul, don't name it. It's been the most enormous diversion to me. Just you wait till the wedding day, though. This is going to be fun, if you like." And then everybody went up to bed. Midsummer Day dawned with a thick grey haze in the air. Miriam's children had been commissioned to pick bunches of flowers for the wedding, and a lorry-load of pink and white rose peonies from Covent Garden had already been discharged at the gates of the farm. Adam Lambsbreath had been early astir, making wreaths of wallflowers with which to garland the horns of Feckless, Pointless, Graceless, and Aimless. Then he led them forth to their morning pasture, singing a smutty song he had learned for the marriage of George I. As the sky grew blue and sunny, the farm buzzed with energy. Phoebe, Letty, Jane, and Susan were whisking syllabubs in the dairy. Mika carried the pails of ice, in which stood the champagne, down to the cellar. Caraway and Harkaway were fixing the awning across from the yard gate to the kitchen door. Ezra, Mark, and Luke were arranging the long trestle tables in the kitchen, while Mrs. Beetle and Flora unpacked the silver and linen sent down in crates from a London store. At 8:30, they all sat down to breakfast.
"I'll just take up her breakfast," said Mrs. Beetle. "I won't be a jiff."
"Oh, I've just been to see Aunt Adah," said Flora. "She doesn't want anything for breakfast except a Hell's Angel. Here, give me an egg. I'll mix it for her." And she went over to the newly stocked store cupboard. They all stared while she tossed an egg, 2 ounces of brandy, a teaspoon of cream, and some chips of ice into a jam jar. "There," she said, giving Mrs. Beetle the foaming jar. "You run along upstairs with that." So Mrs. Beetle ran, but was heard to observe that it would take more than a mess like that to keep her stomach from rumbling before 1 o'clock.
"Is the old un gone off again?" asked Reuben. "Will she come down and upset everything after all, do you think, Cousin Flora?"
"Not on your sweet life. Remember I told you there was going to be a surprise? Well, it's just beginning." Breakfast over, they all fell to work like demons. Reuben, at Flora's request, pulled out from a cupboard the large carved chair in which Aunt Adah had sat on the night of the counting, and Mark and Luke were told to decorate it with the rose peonies. Wreaths of cottage flowers hung from the rafters, their colours glowing against the soft, sooty black of the ceiling and walls. The air smelled sweet. Flora took a last look round and was utterly satisfied. She went upstairs to Aunt Adah's room, knocked, and in response to a crisp, "Come in, my dear," entered and shut the door. Phoebe, who was on her way up to her room to put on her wedding array, nudged Susan.
Did he see that, Soul? Aye, there's something strange in the air today, lovey. And to think on't, our Rennet is no more a maid. And come to say good-bye to me before and took the train from Godmere with un's husband-to-be. Wasn't weeping, poor soul. Nay, but un said un would feel safer when once the words was said, and un's man could not get away. Well, 'tis done now, Lord lovey, and they'll be here for the breakfast, man and wife as ever was.
A hush now fell upon the farm. In a dozen bedrooms the Starkadders struggled with their wedding garments. Flora was soon dressed and went straight down into the kitchen. She arrived just in time to prevent Mr. Maybag from picking a cherry off one of the cakes. Rennet was imploring him not to, and he was laughing like a boyish fawn, or so he thought, and just about to pick at it when Flora sailed in. "Mr. Maybag!" she cried. He jumped as though he'd been stung.
Dear lady, there you are.
"Yes, and so you are, I see. How are you, Mrs. Maybag?" Flora pressed Rennet's hand graciously. At 12 o'clock, they all went down to the church. Quite a big crowd was assembled outside, for the wedding had aroused much interest locally, and the little church itself was crammed. Agony Beetle had supervised the decorations with help from the farmhands. They had agreed that only white flowers were suitable for Elphine's youth and undoubted purity. Flora repressed the unworthy reflection that had reminded her of a white sail at Messrs. Marshall and Snellgrove's, and turned her attention to Letty, Jane, Phoebe, Prue, and Susan, who'd all begun to cry. Silently, she fitted them all out with clean handkerchiefs from a store laid in for this very purpose. Flora took a cautious glance round the church. It seemed full of Starkadders. They were all there, except the 4 whom she'd helped to escape, enjoying themselves, having a nice time. Not because they were raping somebody or having religious mania or loving the soil with the fierce desire of a lecher or anything of that sort. Really, when she thought what they'd all been like only 5 months ago, she bowed her head. She had accomplished a great work and had much to be thankful for. At last the organ struck bravely into "Here Comes the Bride." Something tall, white, and cool as a cloud floated down the aisle. Elphine, pale and serious and starry-eyed, leant upon Reuben's arm, and there was Dick Hawk-Monitor waiting for her. There was Mrs. Hawk-Monitor looking vague in grey, and his sister, healthy Joan Hawk-Monitor, in pink organdy. The music ceased, and into the hush that fell, the vicar's voice broke gravely, "Dearly beloved." After the ceremony, Letty, Susan, Phoebe, and Jane were still roaring away, and Flora had to tell them rather sharply not to make such a noise. Several persons had already asked in kindly concern if they were in pain or had had bad news. "Of course," Mr. Mybug was explaining to Rennet, who was also crying because she'd only had a nasty register office wedding and no lovely dress or wreath. "Of course, this is all the showest barbarism. It's utterly pagan and a bit obscene, too. If we only look below the ritual, that business of throwing the shoe, for instance." "Mr. Mybug, we're all going to the farm now. Of course you're coming too," said Flora. Mr. Mybug hastily promised Rennet another wedding, a proper one, if she would only stop crying, and rushed away with her under his arm after the rest of the party. Soon they were all going in at the farm gate, chattering and laughing. How gay and cheerful the farm looked, with the awning bravely white and crimson in the sun. And, oh, look! Someone had put a rope of wallflowers and geraniums round the neck of Big Business, who was proudly stamping round the big field and pausing to stare over the hedge at the guests with his huge soft eyes. "What a charming idea! So original," said Mrs. Hawk-Monitor, thinking it was rather indelicate. "And the cows, I see, are also wreathed. Quite an idea." Adam came forward. The desolate Atlantic pools that were his eyes were filmed with the ready tears of 90 years. He stopped in front of Elphine, who looked kindly down at him, and held out to her his cupped hands.
"A wedding present for 'ee, matey. A gift for my own wild marsh ticket."
And he opened his hands, revealing a marsh ticket's nest with 4 pink eggs in it. "Oh, Adam, how sweet of you," said Elphine.
"Put it in thy bosom. 'Twill make 'ee bear 4 children,"
advised Adam, and he was proceeding to give further instructions when Flora broke up the meeting by sweeping Adam before her towards the kitchen, assuring him that Elphine would certainly do as he suggested when she'd had something to eat. Flora led the way into the kitchen, followed by the bride and bridegroom and all the guests. As she crossed the threshold, she stepped aside to let them have a clear view of the room, and of somebody who rose from a chair wreathed in peonies and greeted them with a ringing cry, "So here you all are! Welcome to Cold Comfort!" And a handsome old lady, dressed in the smartest black tailor-made costume, advanced to meet the astounded party. Her hands were stretched out in welcome. A roar of amazement broke from Mika, who never did have any tact anyway.
"'Tis Aunt Adah! 'Tis Aunt Adah Doom!"
And the others, released from their first frozen shock of surprise, broke into sundry ejaculations of amazement.
Why, so 'tis, oh, 'tis terrible. 'Tis flying in the face of nature. Oh, in a short skirt, too. Do we mark them legs, lovey? The first time these 20 year. She rising 80. Oh, 'tis enough to kill her.
"Oh, grandmother!" Aunt Adah stood, smiling at them. At last she held up her hand. Immediately silence fell. "Well, good people, all this is very flattering, but if I am to spend any time with my granddaughter and the rest of you, we must hurry up and begin the wedding breakfast. I leave for Paris in less than an hour." On this, confusion broke forth again. The Starkadders were so flabbergasted by the bosom-shattering stupendosity of the event that nothing but a lot of food would persuade them to shut their mouths. So Flora and Ralph Pent-Hartigan, the best man, caught up plates of crab patties and began to circulate among the guests. Soon everyone was enjoying themselves tremendously. It would, of course, have been even more stimulating to the appetite if Aunt Adah had appeared in her usual clothes and with her usual manner and tried to stop the wedding and had been defied by the Starkadders in a body. That would have been worth seeing, if you like. However, what there was good. Flora sat watching over her, smiling at the people around and seeking an opening in the conversation with her aunt to introduce her rights, those mysterious rights which Judith had mentioned in her letter to Flora nearly 6 months ago. And soon it came. Aunt Adah thanked Flora for the 100th time for pointing out to her what a nice time was had by Miss Fanny Ward, who looked so much younger than she really was, and for telling her how luxurious was the Hotel Miramar, and emphasizing what a pleasant life could be led by a handsome, sensible old lady of good fortune, blessed with a sound constitution. "And I will remember, my dear," she said, "to preserve my personality as you advise. You shan't find me plucking my eyebrows, nor dieting, nor doting on a boy of 25. I'm very grateful to you, my Pippet. What pretty thing shall I send you from Paris?" "A work-box, please. Mine is wearing out. But, Aunt Adah, there is something else you can do for me, too. What was the wrong that Amos did to my father, Robert Poste? And what are my rights?" Aunt Adah's face grew grave. She drew Flora towards her and began to speak in a quick murmur. There was not much change in Flora's attentive face. At last the murmur ceased. Flora asked, "And did the goat die?" But at this very second Aunt Adah's attention was distracted by Elphine and Dick, who came up to her with Adam, and Flora's question went unheard. "Grandmother," said Elphine, "Adam wants to come to live at Houchicker Hall with us and look after our cows. May he? We should so like him to. He knows all about cows, you know." "By all means, my dear, but who will care for feckless, graceless, pointless, and aimless if he deserts them?" A piercing cry broke from Adam. He flung himself forward. His gnarled hands were knotted in anguish.
"Nay, never say that, Mrs. Starkadder, ma'am. I'll take 'em with me, all 4 on 'em. There's room for us all at Houchicker Hall."
"It sounds like the finale of the first act of a musical comedy," commented Aunt Adah. Well, you may take them if you want to."
"Bless ye, now bless ye, Mrs. Starkadder, ma'am,"
crooned Adam, and hurried away to tell the cows to make ready for their journey that very afternoon. "And did the goat die? And what about my rights?" asked Flora, but it was no use. Mrs. Hawk Monitor chose that moment to come up and talk to Aunt Adah, so Flora's question was not answered, and it was fated never to be answered. The next interruption was the drone of a powerful motor car. Everyone streamed out of the yard to see Aunt Adah off. The chauffeur was presented with a piece of the wedding cake, and they all stood round the gleaming Bentley laughing and talking while Agony Beetle dashed somebody else's champagne over the bonnet. Aunt Adah climbed into the Bentley and looked out with smiling benevolence on them all. The car's engine roared.
"3 cheers for Aunt Adah!"
cried Irk, flinging his vole-skin cap into the air. Aunt Adah waved and was carried from their sight down the lane. The second departure of Elphine and Richard was noisier than the first. The Starkadders weren't used to drinking champagne, but they liked it all right. There was a great deal of cheering and some tears from Susan, Rennet, Letty, Phoebe, Jane, and Miriam, and some thunderings from Mika, warning Dick to be good to his lily flower. Flora took advantage of the scrimmage to slip back to the kitchen to warn Mrs. Beetle, who was somberly beginning to clear up, not to open any more champagne. "Only in case of illness, Miss Poste." Flora was so wishing everybody would go home. The wedding breakfast seemed to have been going on forever. Except that this was a cheerful occasion, it reminded her of the counting. "Oh," she thought, "and I shall never know what it was that Aunt Adah saw in the woodshed. How I wish I had asked her about that as well." But everyone seemed to have had a perfectly lovely time. She received invitations to dine at Houchicker Hall next week, to visit Mr. and Mrs. Maybag at the studio with Sink, in which they would live in Fitzroy Square, and Irk and Miriam said they would be honoured if Miss Poste would come to tea at Byways, the villa which Irk had bought out of his savings from the water-vole trade, and into which he and his bride would move next week. Flora promised to go to all of them. One by one the guests departed, and the Starkadders, dozy with champagne and the novelty of enjoying themselves, slipped away to their bedchambers to sleep it off. Flora endeavoured to compose her spirits. She was conscious that for the last hour they had been agitated and melancholy. What could be the matter with her? She wished only to be alone. "Miss Poste, you look done up. Come for a run in the old Bouncer?" asked Ralph Pent-Hartigan, who was starting up his little sports car in the yard. "I don't think I'll come for a run, thanks," said Flora. "But it would be very kind of you if you'd take me down to the village. I want to telephone." "I suppose you wouldn't care to dine with me in town tonight?" he said as they went spinning down the hill into Howling. "I would have loved it, but the fact is I've just made up my mind to leave the farm tonight, and I think my cousin is going to fetch me. I'm phoning to see if he's at home. We made the arrangement months ago." In the stuffy telephone box, Flora asked the operator for Charles's number. His family lived in Hertfordshire. There was a swing in the garden, he told Flora, and tobacco flowers in the summer. After a minute's wait, she heard Charles's deep, quiet voice 70 miles away. "Hello?" "Oh, hello, Charles. Is that you? This is Flora. Look here. Are you doing anything tonight?"
"Not if you want me."
"Well, could you be an absolute angel and come and fetch me from the farm tonight? We've had a wedding here today, and I've tidied up. I mean, there's nothing left for me to do here, and I really am rather tired. I'd like to be fetched, if you could."
"I'm coming. What time may I be there?"
"Could you be here by 8, do you think? It's nearly 5 now."
"Of course, I'll be there at 8.
"Charles?"
"Yeah?"
"Charles, I mean, it isn't putting you out or anything?" Smiling, she hung up the receiver to the tiny, distant sound of Charles's laughter. Ralph drove her back to the farm. She went upstairs and changed. Then she packed her trunk. It was 6 o'clock when she came downstairs to the kitchen. All was cool, quiet, blessedly peaceful. Flora's supper was neatly laid out, and of the Starkadders there was not a sign. She supposed they must all be asleep, or else gone a-mollocking off to Godmere. She wrote an affectionate little letter for Reuben, promising to come down again very soon to see them all, and enclosed some money and her earnest thanks for Mrs. Beetle. She left the note open on the table, where not even a Starkadder could be alarmed by it or mysterious about it. Then she sat down with a sigh in a comfortable deep chair and relaxed. She would sit here for a while, then she would eat her supper, and then go out into the field and sit on the stile under the may tree and wait for Charles. Her dreamy musings were interrupted by the distant soft jangling of bells. She recognized the sound. It was made by the bells that Adam had hung round the necks of Graceless, Pointless, Feckless, and Aimless. Even as she listened, a procession came into sight. It wound across the rising path which she could see silhouetted against the blue sky and held as if in a frame by the open door. It was Adam and the cows on their way to Howchicker Hall. Adam went first, wearing his ancient hat and his age-green corduroys. The little mop was slung round his neck. He was singing the bawdy song he had learnt for the wedding of George I. Behind him came the cows in single file, still wreathed with their wedding garlands. They swung their heads in lowly content, and their bells chimed in time to Adam's singing. Slowly they passed across the frame of the doorway. Then they were gone. Nothing could be seen save the green path rising away into the empty blue of the evening sky. The dying sound of the bells came back to Flora, softly and more softly, until it was lost in silence.